Chapter 1, Being Schemed Against. Hurry up, I saw her running this way, chase after her. Damn it, that little brat dared to kick me. Just wait until I catch her, let's see how I'll deal with her. Nina Taylor leaned against the door, panting heavily, trying her best to suppress her breathing as she listened to the fading sound of footsteps outside. She knew Charlotte Smith had deliberately set her up by inviting her to this party, but she hadn't expected Charlotte to stoop so low as to blatantly drug her. The moment she realized something was wrong with her body, she hurriedly fled the scene, narrowly escaping capture. Her body was growing increasingly hot, and she felt as though she was on the verge of losing consciousness. At that moment, a cold, deep voice suddenly sounded from behind her. "What are you doing here?" Startled, Nina Taylor spun around quickly. In the living room stood a man. Beneath a luxurious black robe, his well-defined muscles were faintly visible. He had his arms crossed over his chest, leaning lazily against the wall. His casual posture was anything but sloppy, instead, it exuded an indescribable elegance and allure. He looked as if he had just stepped out of the shower, his hair was still damp, and beneath the slightly disheveled strands, his deep-set eyes gleamed with an air of arrogance, as though nothing in the world could faze him. His straight, prominent nose and sensuous thin lips made every feature of his face seem as if it had been sculpted to perfection. Even Nina Taylor, who had encountered countless handsome men, couldn't help but marvel, how could someone be this breathtakingly attractive? Another wave of heat surged through her body, making Nina Taylor's vision grow even hazier. The drug Charlotte Smith had given her was far too potent. In just moments, her body was already nearing its limit. If this continued, Nina Taylor feared that once she lost consciousness, she might actually run out into the street and start grabbing random men. To hell with it, if she was doomed anyway, she might as well take a chance. At least he wasn't unattractive, she thought. With that, Nina Taylor lunged toward him. The man sidestepped, causing her to miss and tumble to the ground. Undeterred, Nina Taylor grabbed hold of his leg and began climbing up. By this point, she was losing her senses, her shame all but forgotten. The man frowned as he looked down at the woman in front of him. Women throwing themselves at him was nothing new, but none had ever been as unattractive as this one. Her sallow face, overly thick and red lips, two unusually large buck teeth, and the most unbearable feature, a large birthmark on her cheek. Her thick hair looked unbearably rustic, but hidden beneath it were a pair of enchanting, almond-shaped eyes that seemed completely out of place on such a face. The man narrowed his eyes slightly. Was this little girl in disguise? Moreover, her reaction clearly indicated she had been drugged. At that moment, Nina Taylor began kissing the man's face when suddenly, she heard a mocking chuckle close to her ear. The next second, she was pinned down on the bed. "You want me, huh?" The man's seductive voice sounded near her ear, so melodious it could rival the heavens, yet it only fueled Nina Taylor's burning desire further. "Yes. I want, please. I won't treat you poorly." "Won't treat me poorly? Then what exactly do you plan to do?" The man's alluring voice remained leisurely. Nina Taylor, now overwhelmed by heat, desperately pulled him closer with her hands. Anything, just hurry up." The man, satisfied with her answer, let out a devilish laugh. He forcefully pinned down her restless hands, then leaned in dominantly to kiss her lips. "I've been so numb, I can't feel you there." Nina Taylor jolted awake to the sound of her phone ringing and hastily pressed the answer button. "Hello, Nina? You finally called back. Are you okay?" Emma Harper's worried voice came through from the other end. Nina Taylor froze for a moment before remembering that, after realizing she had been drugged, she had called Emma Harper for help. Unfortunately, Emma's line had been busy at the time, and then she abruptly turned her head to the side. There really was a man lying next to her. Chapter 2, The Scorned Woman Arrives to Catch Them, Nina? Emma Harper anxiously called out again when she didn't get a response. "I'm fine, Emma," Nina Taylor replied, glancing at the man who was now sitting up with his back against the headboard. "I'll call you back later." She tossed her phone aside and faced the man, trying her best to appear calm. "Sorry about this. Let's just say you've done me a favor." "A favor?" What a way to put it. Clearly nervous, yet she insisted on acting like a seasoned pro. "I don't usually do favors for free." The man had lit a cigarette, and through the hazy smoke, his chiseled, handsome face looked almost otherworldly. His stunning eyes, now carrying a teasing smirk, seemed capable of stealing someone's very soul. Nina Taylor stared at his slender fingers holding the cigarette. Even such a simple action appeared incredibly elegant when performed by this man. Remembering what had just transpired, her face involuntarily flushed red. "Then, sir, what do you want?" Nina Taylor asked as she tried to maintain composure while hurriedly putting on her clothes. "Why are your hands trembling?" The man didn't answer her question but instead posed one of his own. Nina Taylor's movements froze. She could almost imagine the provocative expression on the man's face at this moment. "I'm calcium deficient," Nina Taylor said calmly. Nina Taylor quickly finished putting on her clothes and took out her wallet. "Is 100 enough?" Nina Taylor ignored her heart, shattered like a steamed bun filling, and pretended to ask generously. 100? The man furrowed his thick eyebrows, his narrow eyes squinting slightly. This woman, was she trying to pay him for a night? Then 200? Someone's confidence began to waver. If looks could kill, then at this moment, she would have been dead countless times already. Nina Taylor gritted her teeth and stomped her foot. 250. Take it or leave it. 250, she had already sacrificed even her taxi fare. A strong murderous intent flared in the man's eyes. In his 28 years of life, no one had ever dared to insult him so directly. Was this girl tired of living? Nina Taylor's scalp tingled as she slapped the money onto the man's thigh with a loud smack. "This is all I have. That's all." The man's voice wasn't loud, but it carried a chilling coldness, as if echoing from the depths of hell. Yes, that's all." After speaking, Nina Taylor pretended to be nonchalant, draping her arm around the man's neck like they were best buddies, and advised, "Look, when you guys go out to have fun, you still have to pay, right? I'm even volunteering here. You shouldn't be so ungrateful. Although my face is." Nina Taylor glanced sideways under her hair. "Well, maybe a bit unique, but my figure is at least." The man's gaze swept over her. "Passable." Nina Taylor screamed internally. Was there anyone more pitiful than her, losing both money and dignity at the same time? The man raised his perfectly arched eyebrows. Before he could say anything, a voice echoed from outside. "I clearly saw her run this way and disappear. Let's search every room, we'll find her eventually." It was Charlotte Smith's voice. Nina Taylor immediately panicked. She knew it, Charlotte Smith's intentions were never simple. At this moment, the man no longer appeared as angry as before. Instead, he leaned leisurely against the headboard, watching the petite woman scurry about in a fluster. And just then, click, the door to the room was pushed open. The moment the door opened, Nina Taylor's mind went blank, and she hurriedly clung tightly to the man. From their position outside the door, Charlotte Smith and the others could only vaguely see Nina Taylor, her clothes disheveled, clinging to a man. However, they couldn't clearly see the man's face due to the angle. Charlotte Smith's heart surged with excitement. The identity of the man didn't matter, all that mattered was that Nina Taylor's reputation was tarnished. Feigning an expression of anger, Charlotte Smith pointed at Nina Taylor and exclaimed, "Nina Taylor, you shameless woman! We thought you were sick and came out of kindness to check on you, but who would have thought you'd dare to do something like this behind Ethan's back? You're too much." Chapter 3, This is my second uncle. Ethan Turner stood next to Charlotte Smith, dressed in a perfectly tailored white suit, exuding a refined yet cold demeanor. His face carried a sorrowful expression as he watched Nina Taylor's retreating figure, softly calling out, "Nina." Inwardly, he cursed Charlotte Smith, this foolish woman. He had worked so hard to intimidate Nina Taylor, yet she always seemed to stir up trouble. However, a glint of smugness flashed in Ethan Turner's narrow eyes. With his magnanimity, Nina Taylor would surely become even more devoted to him. Hearing Ethan Turner's sickening Nina Taylor felt her skin crawl. She could vividly imagine his fake, overly sweet expression. Did he still think she was the naive fool from 8 years ago? Dream on if he thought he could dominate her. Her almond-shaped eyes shifted beneath her hair as she glanced at the man watching the drama unfold. She smiled. The man's expression froze as, in the blink of an eye, Nina Taylor lunged toward him. "Second uncle. Second uncle. Are you all right? Please wake up, wake up." As she spoke, she lifted the man's face, frantically blinking at him. "Second uncle?" Not only was the man stunned, but Charlotte Smith and Ethan Turner also froze, stepping into the room with questioning looks to see what was happening. Before anyone could react, Nina Taylor wrapped her arms tightly around the man, exclaiming, "This is great! This is great! Second uncle, you're finally awake, thank goodness. You know you have low blood sugar, why would you stay in the bathroom for so long? I was worried sick. It's such a relief you're okay." She cried out in joy, tears streaming down her face. But something seemed off about everyone's expressions. Lowering her head, she realized the man's face was pressed tightly against her chest. Nina Taylor froze on the spot. She had only wanted to prevent the man from showing any surprise, hoping to avoid exposing her lie. Slowly releasing him, she was about to flash a smile at his darkened expression when a startled exclamation rang out, "Young Master Blake?" Ethan Turner's eyes lit up with excitement. He took 2 eager steps forward but froze under the man's sharp gaze. Rubbing his hands nervously, Ethan put on a fawning smile. "Young Master Blake, is it really you? Your arrival in City S is such an honor for us." Nina Taylor stared at Ethan Turner in astonishment. Wasn't this Ethan Turner the same man who always liked to present himself as an elegant gentleman? Wasn't he always acting high and mighty? Why was he suddenly groveling like this? "Young Master Blake. Blake. Young Master Blake." Nina Taylor slowly opened her eyes, her bewildered gaze landing on the man sitting nonchalantly on the bed, completely at ease despite being stark naked. Him, could he really be Mason Blake? The man's lips curved into a faint smirk, as if confirming her suspicion. Ethan Turner paid no attention to the exchange between the two and feigned concern as he asked, "Young Master Blake, are you all right just now?" In truth, he desperately wanted to ask why the renowned Mason Blake had suddenly turned into Nina Taylor's so-called second uncle. This Mason Blake wasn't just a jewelry mogul, he had also single-handedly dominated real estate, healthcare, engineering, and numerous other industries, making him obscenely wealthy. Nina Taylor's parents had been lifelong friends with his family before their passing, so why had he never heard of the Taylors having such an influential relative? Nina Taylor, of course, knew what Ethan Turner was suspecting. She herself hadn't expected to stumble upon such a famous relative. Mason Blake glanced over at Nina Taylor and saw her biting her lip in frustration, her two prominent front teeth giving her a rabbit-like appearance. This little brat, now she regrets it. Why didn't she think twice before calling him second uncle earlier? Does he look that old? I am this Miss Taylor. Mason Blake began, his voice laced with mischief. He stopped mid-sentence, deliberately leaving her hanging to tease her further. But in the very next moment, Nina Taylor lunged forward and threw her arms around Mason Blake. "Oh, second uncle, it's been so long. I missed you so much." As she spoke, she clung to Mason Blake's arm, rubbing her face against his shoulder in a playful act of affection. "Damn, so smooth," Nina Taylor silently exclaimed to herself. Of course, she didn't forget to use her unseen hand to pinch Mason Blake hard, signaling him to play along. No matter what, she had to hold her ground until the end. Burying her face into Mason Blake's shoulder, she anxiously awaited his final verdict. Mason Blake lowered his head to look at the petite woman nestled by his side. For the first time in 28 years, he suddenly felt his heart soften. His ink-black eyes momentarily revealed a trace of gentleness, becoming radiant in an instant, leaving everyone present utterly mesmerized. "Yes, her father and I are good friends." Chapter 4, Turns out she's a beauty. The deep, warm voice, like Blue Mountain coffee, resonated softly in her ears. Nina Taylor couldn't help but detect a hint of gentleness. Was it just her imagination? All the grievances she had endured in the Turner household over the years suddenly surged back with the man's words. Nina Taylor lifted her head, astonished as she gazed at his handsome face, her heart swelling with an overwhelming urge to cry. "Humph, uncle? Who are you trying to fool, Nina Taylor? This so-called uncle of yours is probably just some kind of foster guardian, isn't he?" Charlotte Smith sneered venomously at Nina Taylor. At this moment, Nina Taylor was fully alert. It was obvious someone had helped her neutralize the drug. She didn't believe for a second that the relationship between these two was as innocent as they claimed. Charlotte had gone through great lengths to seize this opportunity to ruin the ugly Nina Taylor, to humiliate her publicly and force the Turner family to succumb to societal pressure and annul the engagement between Ethan Turner and Nina Taylor, which had been arranged since childhood. Only then could Charlotte smoothly secure her position as the Turner family's future daughter-in-law. There was no way she would let this chance slip away. Slap! A resounding slap echoed through the room. Charlotte Smith stared at Ethan Turner in shock, her eyes wide and brimming with fear, unable to utter a word. "You insolent wretch! How dare you slander young Master Blake?" Nina Taylor, too, was stunned by Ethan Turner's actions. However, considering how Charlotte had schemed against her, it was only fitting that she now faced the consequences of her own deeds. Nina Taylor had never claimed to be a saint. Mason Blake lowered his gaze to Nina Taylor's delicate and mischievous face, the corners of his lips curling into a faint smile. Ethan Turner, catching sight of this, quickly turned to Nina Taylor with a forced grin. "Nina, why didn't you tell me second uncle was here?" "Second uncle, I'm Nina's fiancé." As he spoke, he made sure to give Nina Taylor a deliberately affectionate look. "Fiancé," the deep-set eyes narrowed slightly, a sharp gaze like a blade shot toward Nina Taylor, accompanied by a low voice. "Oh, so the little niece is already engaged? And I didn't know." The final carried a chilling undertone of menace. Nina Taylor instinctively felt a pang of guilt and lowered her head, feigning obedience. Ethan Turner, oblivious to the tension, continued to ingratiate himself. Yes, Nina and I have been childhood sweethearts. Our engagement was arranged when we were kids." Ethan Turner said this, naturally hoping Mason Blake would take Nina Taylor into consideration and lend him some support in business matters later on. "Humph." Mason Blake let out a cold snort, saying nothing more. An awkward silence enveloped the room. Nina Taylor was the first to break under the weight of it, speaking in a soft and coquettish tone. "Brother Ethan, Uncle Mason needs rest. Let's leave now." Mason Blake's gaze grew even frostier. Seeing his fiancée so eager to leave, did this girl think of him as her savior from trouble? It was only then that Ethan Turner began to piece things together. Mason Blake, a legendary figure, had fainted in the bathtub due to low blood sugar. He was likely simmering with embarrassment and anger. Annoyed, Ethan Turner shot a glare at Charlotte Smith. If they ended up offending Mason Blake, there'd be no good days ahead for any of them. Yes, we won't disturb young Master Blake's rest any longer. We'll visit another time. Excuse us, excuse us." With that, he ignored Nina Taylor's slight resistance, grabbed her hand, and led her out of the room, completely forgetting about Charlotte Smith in the process. Finally, Charlotte Smith began to grasp the extraordinary status of the man before her, thanks to Ethan Turner's words. She had been a second-tier actress for a long time, struggling to make a name for herself. If she could seduce this man, wouldn't her future be secure? She offered what she thought was a seductive smile, her voice dripping with sweetness and flirtation as she called out, "Young Master Blake, you get out." At that moment, Mason Blake exuded an aura of menace so intense it was suffocating. Charlotte Smith was so terrified that she wet herself, scrambling to flee the room, tripping and stumbling several times on her way out. Mason Blake's mind lingered on the image of Nina Taylor's hand being held by Ethan Turner as they left, his eyes revealing a cold and intriguing expression. Nina Taylor, That day, Nina Taylor was working on her design in her small rented apartment when she suddenly heard the phone ring. The screen displayed the name Ethan Turner. She pursed her lips and pressed the answer button. "Nina, are you free tonight? My parents want to invite you over for dinner." "Ethan, I have a project due tomorrow. I probably can't make it," Nina Taylor replied while continuing her work without pause. "My parents want to discuss our engagement. Please try to come over," Ethan insisted. Nina Taylor frowned. What kind of tricks was this family trying to pull again? Though slightly annoyed, she still responded, "All right, I'll make arrangements and try to come by tonight." There was no other choice. Now was not the time to confront them. Setting down her pen, Nina Taylor looked up, and in the mirror opposite, a stunningly beautiful face reflected back at her. Chapter 5, Face Slapping. Her large, round eyes sparkled like water, her high, straight nose was delicate, and her pale pink lips were alluring. All these features came together to form a petite, oval-shaped face with perfect proportions. Her hair was casually tied up, exuding a pure and natural beauty. The simple white t-shirt she wore only accentuated her already smooth, radiant skin, which seemed so delicate it might shatter at a touch. Good grief, Nina Taylor sighed, frustrated. It was time to disguise herself again. After transforming into her ugly girl persona, Nina Taylor squeezed onto a crowded bus and arrived at the Turner residence by 7 p.m. As soon as she opened the door, a shrill female voice screeched, "Nina Taylor! I told you to come home for dinner, but you act like you're so important. Now you show up this late, are you trying to starve us on purpose?" "Wow, Auntie, you're supposedly starving, yet your voice still sounds so strong," Nina Taylor sneered in response. The food on the table was nearly gone, no trace of warmth left, yet the woman had the audacity to claim they'd been waiting for her. Helen Turner's face turned bright red with anger. "Nina Taylor, how dare you speak to me like that? Our family has raised you all these years, and this is how you repay us. A snake in the grass." Sophia Turner, seeing Nina Taylor's retort, immediately joined in, scolding her before sneering, "My brother treats you kindly because he's a good person. Do you still think you're the precious heiress of the Taylor family? Look at yourself, what a disgrace. If it weren't for the inheritance of drafts that Nina Taylor would gain when she turned 20, the Turner family wouldn't have tolerated this wretched woman for so long." "All right, little Sophia, don't speak to Nina like that. She must have important things to do, isn't that right, Nina?" Ethan Turner chimed in, feigning a gentle defense. Nina Taylor nodded indifferently, not wanting to prolong the exchange. Important? Of course, she's busy. She's in her 3rd year of college and still failing courses left and right. How could she not be anxious? Sophia Turner mocked. "Enough, quiet down," Robert Turner, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. "Nina, you haven't eaten yet, have you? Have something to eat." "No need, Uncle. Let's just get to the point," Nina Taylor replied coldly. Sophia Turner smirked, fully expecting the topic to be about marriage arrangements. Ahem, Robert Turner cleared his throat. "Nina, here's the thing. You're at the age to get married, and we've been preparing for the wedding between you and Ethan. However, Naya Corporation is currently hosting a jewelry design competition. If we can win the crown, the Turner Corporation will officially break into the international jewelry industry. So, you want the drafts my mother left me?" Nina Taylor asked, her tone icy. "Nina, you'll marry Ethan eventually. Contributing to the Turner Corporation is part of your responsibility," Robert Turner said, his voice tinged with disapproval at her attitude. "Exactly, Nina Taylor. You're both ugly and stupid. My brother marrying you is a blessing you don't deserve. After all the years we've fed and housed you, what's the big deal about handing over 2 lousy drafts?" Sophia Turner chimed in mockingly. "Lousy drafts?" Nina Taylor's eyes narrowed, her beautiful gaze igniting with fury, causing Sophia Turner to shudder involuntarily. "Take back what you just said," Nina demanded. "You." "Sophia, don't be rude." Robert Turner hastily scolded Sophia Turner, then turned to Nina Taylor and said, "Nina, Sophia is still young, don't take her behavior to heart." Nina Taylor's mother, Selena Taylor, was a genius jewelry designer when she was alive. If they could obtain the draft Selena left for Nina Taylor, the Turner Corporation would have no worries about its growth. This was also why Ethan Turner always pretended to be a devoted man in front of Nina Taylor. Young? She's only 4 years older than me. Being uneducated is just an excuse. Nina Taylor retorted without hesitation, pouting. Smack. Helen Turner slapped Nina Taylor across the face and coldly shouted, "Who are you insulting?" Smack. Another slap echoed through the room. This time, Helen Turner was the one sent sprawling to the ground. Such force, clearly, it wasn't Nina Taylor who delivered the blow. Dare to lay a hand on someone under my protection? Tired of living? A chilling voice sounded near Nina Taylor's ear. She looked up in shock at the man who had suddenly appeared before her, Mason Blake. Not only Nina Taylor but the entire Turner family was stunned by the sudden appearance of this man, his aura exuding an undeniable regal dominance. Helen Turner, who had been furious after being slapped, now dared not act out because of Mason Blake's overwhelming presence. Instead, she clutched her reddened cheek and angrily scolded the servant who had just arrived. "Are you blind? Who allowed you to bring unrelated people in here? Do you think the Turner household is a place anyone can just walk into?" Smack. Helen Turner received yet another slap. Completely dazed by the repeated blows, she stared blankly at Robert Turner and asked, "Husband, why did you hit me?" Chapter 6, Is there a dish to boost vitality? Shut up. Robert Turner glared at her, then turned respectfully and said, "Young Master Blake, why are you here?" Mason Blake ignored him entirely. He was lowering his gaze, staring at Nina Taylor's face, which bore the marks of a slap. Even the thick makeup couldn't hide the imprint of a hand, and it ignited his fury. At this moment, Nina Taylor's beautiful eyes shimmered with unshed tears, a stark contrast to the state of her face. She looked at him pitifully, as if ready to complain, "Second uncle." Mason Blake's expression, which had softened slightly at Nina Taylor's tearful gaze, immediately hardened again upon hearing her call him, "Second uncle." "Second uncle, it hurts." The unexpected slap from Helen Turner had brought back a flood of painful memories for Nina Taylor, reminding her of all the humiliation she had endured in this household. Her grief surged momentarily, but strangely, all those emotions vanished the instant Mason Blake appeared. So, when she noticed Mason Blake's stiff expression, she felt a mischievous urge to tease him further and couldn't help but let out a small smile. On the other hand, Ethan Turner's mood was far from good. While others might not understand the relationship between Nina Taylor and Mason Blake, he knew very well. Hurriedly, he explained to his father, "Father, I forgot to mention, young Master Blake is a friend of both my father and Nina's father." "Our Nina?" Nina Taylor pouted, thinking to herself how exaggeratedly fake his act was. Robert Turner, though suspicious, didn't dare show it. He quickly said, "I had no idea young Master Blake knew Nina's father. Her father and I are good friends, and seeing how pitiful Nina was, we took her in over the years and treated her like our own daughter." "Oh, is that so?" Mason Blake asked coldly. He clearly noticed how the young woman, after hearing this statement, turned her back to them. Her gaze, directed at him, burned with an intense, unyielding hatred. Mason Blake frowned slightly. Such deep-seated hatred should not exist in a girl of only 20. Recalling how they had just struck Nina Taylor in front of Mason Blake, Robert Turner found himself at a loss for words. Mason Blake, unwilling to waste any more time conversing with them, coldly declared to the Turner family, "I'm taking Nina Taylor with me." With that, he reached out, wrapped his arm around Nina Taylor, and led her out. Nina Taylor simply lowered her head and obediently followed Mason Blake. No one in the Turner family dared utter a word. After dismissing the driver, Mason Blake seated Nina Taylor securely in the passenger seat before returning to the driver's side and starting the car. This moment, City S was lit up, exuding a serene beauty everywhere, but Nina Taylor's face carried a sorrow so profound it was heartbreaking. Mason Blake frowned. He didn't like seeing Nina Taylor like this and spoke up, "Do you feel like eating something?" Hearing this, Nina Taylor was momentarily stunned. She recalled someone once saying that only close friends would ask each other, "Do you want to eat something?" Upon meeting, looking at the man in front of her, whom she had only met twice, she felt a sudden wave of unease. Screech! Mason Blake abruptly pulled the car over to the side of the road. Turning to look at Nina Taylor, his face carried a teasing expression as he asked, "You're not thinking about eating me, are you? Though I'd fill you up, I doubt your stomach could handle it." Seriously, young Master Blake, is it that hard for you to speak in a way that befits your status? Nina Taylor's sadness evaporated instantly. She deliberately used her most exaggerated, sickly sweet tone to retort, "Of course, I want to eat the 10 most expensive dishes at the priciest hotel in City S, uncle." Pretending not to understand the hidden sarcasm in her words, Mason Blake nodded, "Got it." Seeing her attempt to provoke him fail, Nina Taylor immediately lost interest and slumped back into her seat with a pout. A moment later, her unusually large, beautiful eyes darted around as if she had thought of something clever. A sly smile crept across her face. Noticing her mood finally improving, the corners of Mason Blake's lips involuntarily curved upward, but his smile quickly vanished. Grand Sun Hotel. "Excuse me, do you have a menu with aphrodisiac dishes here?" Nina Taylor flashed her 2 front teeth in a wide grin and asked the waiter with a gleam in her eye. The waiter began sweating profusely. The young lady in front of him, dining with young Master Blake, was clearly no ordinary person. He dared not offend her. But an aphrodisiac menu? He turned to look at Mason Blake, only to find the man's handsome face darkened like a storm cloud, with an icy chill radiating from him. "Miss, we do not have such a menu here," the waiter replied nervously. "Ah," Nina Taylor dragged out the sound, feigning disappointment. "But I was hoping to pick the most suitable dish for my dear second uncle." "How could you not have it? Can't you make a special arrangement for him?" Chapter 7, Pinned Against the Wall and Kissed. The more chaotic Nina Taylor became, the more amused she felt, completely unaware that she had started playing with fire. Mason Blake snatched the menu and handed it to the waiter. "Bring every dish on the menu here. Leave now." The waiter hurriedly exited. "Wait a minute." Nina Taylor stared at the retreating figure of the waiter, feeling as if she might explode. At the Grand Sun Hotel, where every inch of space was as valuable as gold, ordering 10 dishes was already enough for her to feast for 4 or 5 years of college. Yet Mason Blake had just told them to bring the entire menu? "Why are you ordering so much? Planning to throw a Manchuhan imperial feast?" Nina Taylor shouted angrily. "I want to," Mason Blake replied calmly, his face utterly unbothered. This undeniable privilege of wealth and power left Nina Taylor speechless. Mason Blake suddenly stood up. His nearly 6'3" frame, accentuated by a tailored gray suit, appeared even taller, leaner, and more imposing, exuding an air of nobility. He approached Nina Taylor, leaning in close. His face, as perfect as a masterpiece crafted by the divine, loomed right in front of her, causing her heart to race. Flustered and furious, she frowned and snapped, "What are you doing?" The corners of Mason Blake's lips curved into a devilish smile as he said softly, "Dessert before the meal." With that, he kissed Nina Taylor on the lips. Nina Taylor's eyes widened as she stared at the strikingly handsome face before her. At this distance, she couldn't spot a single pore. His long, thick eyelashes resembled two elegant curtains. A wave of irritation surged in her heart. Why would a man, who wasn't even a celebrity, need to be this good-looking? Wait, this wasn't the time to think about such things. Nina Taylor quickly raised her hands, intending to push him away, but Mason Blake had already anticipated her move. With one hand firmly gripping the back of her neck, he deepened the kiss even further. Mason Blake also found it strange. He had lived for 28 years and had encountered all kinds of women, yet he had a reaction to her, even though he didn't truly know what she looked like. Suddenly, Mason Blake pulled Nina Taylor's head against his chest. Nina Taylor could hear the strong, powerful heartbeat of Mason Blake. Remembering the kiss just moments ago, her petite face flushed red as if it might bleed. At this moment, she heard a deep, husky voice above her head, "Break off the engagement with Ethan Turner immediately." Nina Taylor froze, biting her lip as she stepped out of Mason Blake's embrace and shook her head. "I can't." She didn't want to continue the engagement with Ethan Turner, at least not now, because there were still things she hadn't finished. "You haven't said no." The atmosphere suddenly grew tense, and the temperature seemed to drop below freezing. Hearing Mason Blake's domineering tone, Nina Taylor became angry as well. "I won't break off the engagement. My marriage is my decision. You say I have no right, but do you? Mason Blake, who do you think you are to me? Who do you think I am to you?" Mason Blake's normally pleasant voice now sounded as if it came from the depths of hell, carrying an indescribable sense of danger. Nina Taylor suddenly felt a pang of guilt. "Mason Blake, are you really such a petty man? It was just one night together. Do you have to make such a big fuss about it?" Suppressing her inner turmoil, Nina Taylor tried to joke with Mason Blake. Mason Blake remained silent, glaring at Nina Taylor as if he wanted to devour her whole. Finally, Nina Taylor shook off any lingering guilt, raised her head, and fiercely glared back at Mason Blake. "What do you want from me? It's not like I cheated you. I even gave you $250, didn't I?" $250 was still money. She didn't sleep with him for free. If Nina Taylor hadn't mentioned the $250, it might have been fine. But as soon as she did, Mason Blake's fury flared even more. Yet, faced with Nina Taylor's shamelessness, he found himself unable to say a word. Mason Blake, of course, wouldn't let Nina Taylor gain the upper hand. He steadily closed the distance between them, each step slow but exuding a deadly aura of danger. At this moment, seeing Mason Blake's demeanor, Nina Taylor no longer dared to tease him. She could only back away with each step he advanced. Finally, when there was nowhere left to retreat, thud! Mason Blake braced one hand against the wall, trapping Nina Taylor within his arms. Chapter 8, Collaborating with the Renowned Director. Damn it! How could she be so easily cornered like this? Facing this face, even the young master of the Blake family managed to corner her. No wonder rumors have been circulating for years that he keeps his distance from women. Who would have guessed his peculiar taste? Nina Taylor screamed internally, but she dared not make any move that might provoke this wealthy man. Mason Blake noticed Nina Taylor's darting eyes and immediately knew she was overthinking again. This little troublemaker just couldn't behave. He suddenly lowered his head, leaning close enough for his lips to brush against her ear. His warm breath lightly caressed Nina Taylor's sensitive earlobe, making her entire body go weak. Sensing the change in the petite girl before him, Mason Blake's mood finally improved a bit. He chuckled softly, his voice still cold yet elegant, as he said, "Nina Taylor, you are mine." After speaking, he turned and walked out of the private room. Staying any longer, he wasn't sure what he might do to her. "Wait!" Nina Taylor, still dazed from the earlier encounter, called out in a voice tinged with weakness and vulnerability. Mason Blake paused mid-step, not turning back, but the corners of his lips curved into a stunning smile. Had the little troublemaker finally come to her senses? That was quick. "Don't forget to pay the bill before you leave." Mason Blake felt that, as of late, he had zero intention of forgiving this infuriating little brat. Ever since the day Mason Blake took her away, the Turner family had stopped bothering her for a while, which made Nina Taylor feel quite at ease. At the moment, she was sitting by a fan, eating watermelon, and pondering where she might go to find design inspiration when an unfamiliar ringtone suddenly chimed. Nina Taylor blinked, only then remembering it was the ringtone for her other phone. Answering the call, the booming voice of Assistant Director Orton came from the other end. "Hey, why did it take you so long to pick up?" "Assistant Director Orton, sorry about that. I was just spacing out," Nina Taylor replied with an apologetic laugh. "You're still young, why are you already zoning out like an old person, haha. But you won't have time to zone out anymore soon." "No time to zone out? Could it be that the script I wrote has been approved?" "What do you mean?" Nina Taylor tried to suppress the excitement in her heart and asked Assistant Director Orton for confirmation. "Haha, haven't you already guessed it? Stop pretending to be clueless with me." "Yes, it's exactly what you're thinking. The great director John Cena has approved your script and is now preparing for filming. This call is to invite you to the set for the casting process. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., same location as before, be on time." Yes, absolutely." Nina Taylor, sitting in her apartment, beamed with joy while holding her phone, looking as if she was about to bow deeply in gratitude. After hanging up, Nina Taylor couldn't help but giggle foolishly. Collaborating with John Cena, one of the top famous directors in the country, would not only skyrocket her reputation but also bring in a flood of money. The Turner family had always treated Nina Taylor harshly. The living expenses they provided her were less than what an average family would have, barely enough to get by. But Nina Taylor, determined to study design, knew she needed a foundation in art. Once, to save money for painting supplies, she fell ill while staying outside and didn't even dare to buy medicine. To achieve her dream of following in her mother's footsteps to become a jewelry designer, Nina Taylor began earning money by writing. Now, she had become a screenwriter with some recognition. Nina Taylor felt as though her dream was gradually coming closer to reality. At Shadowed General Film Studio, a taxi slowly came to a stop. A slender girl wearing a simple purple dress stepped out of the car. Her slightly wavy long hair cascaded down her back, and her small face was partially hidden behind oversized tea-colored sunglasses, revealing only a delicate, fair chin. Despite her simple attire, she exuded an extraordinary beauty. That girl was none other than Nina Taylor, the screenwriter who had come to participate in the casting process. Inside the studio, a few moderately famous actors were gathered in small groups, chatting. Hey, I heard the screenwriter is coming to the audition today, but they haven't shown up yet. I wonder what they look like. Actor A asked curiously, secretly considering if they could find a way to curry favor. What could a screenwriter possibly look like? Their opinion doesn't really matter anyway, Actor B said dismissively. But I heard this screenwriter is quite formidable. Previously, during a casting session, they outright rejected someone the producer wanted to include, Actor A said, shaking their head with a worried expression. Impossible. How could a screenwriter have that much power? Actor B remained skeptical. Well, then you don't know the whole story. Chapter 9, A Twist of Fate. Another person, privy to the matter, spoke mysteriously. This screenwriter started her career writing novels, all of which were bestsellers. Many people want to collaborate with her. The scripts she writes don't require licensing fees. Instead, she uses them as her investment. Whatever you earn, she earns the same. If you don't make money, she bears the loss. She's both an investor and the person who understands the script best, so naturally, her opinions are highly valued. So what? A cocky voice rang out from behind them. The group turned around to see Charlotte Smith swaggering over, a smug expression on her face. She said, "A screenwriter is just a screenwriter." Of course, that only applies to capable actors. As for those without any real talent, they can only bow to the whims of minor roles, ha! As she finished speaking, she didn't forget to cast a disdainful glance at the group of extras. After she walked away, Actor B spat on the ground, sneering, "TCH, what's there to be arrogant about? Isn't she just someone who climbed into the producer's bed? Disgusting, pretending to be some pure goddess." All of this happened to be witnessed by Nina Taylor as she entered the set with her team. Her pale pink lips, full and alluring beneath her sunglasses, curled into a faint smirk. Charlotte Smith, what a small world. The so-called casting process was really just a preliminary selection of a few actors who seemed relatively suitable for the roles. Of course, it wasn't without those who pulled strings behind the scenes. Nina Taylor maintained her usual habit. After entering the filming area, she disguised herself as an ordinary crew member to observe the actors' performances. John Cena, true to his reputation as a renowned director, had made casting choices that largely matched the essence of the original characters. Finally, it was Charlotte Smith's turn. The role Charlotte was vying for this time was Eleanor Walker, a virtuous woman rescued by the female protagonist, a legendary general, during a fateful encounter. Eleanor later became one of the protagonist's most trusted confidants. Charlotte Smith had already received assurances from Ethan Turner and wasn't the least bit worried about losing this role. But then, cut. Charlotte froze in place, momentarily unable to process what had just happened. John Cena's unceremonious voice rang out, "Eleanor Walker, your husband is planning to sell you to a brothel just to bail out his concubine, and you're happy about it? Damn it, you're such a masochist." Charlotte Smith was stunned on the spot after being scolded. Assistant Director Cena quickly rushed over to mediate, saying, "Oh, come on, Charlotte is just too excited about working with Director Shao and hasn't adjusted yet. Normally, Charlotte acts really well. Let's do it again, and I'm sure there won't be any problems, right, Charlotte?" It was only then that Charlotte snapped out of it and quickly nodded. John Cena was about to say something more when Assistant Director Orton leaned in and whispered a few words to him, prompting him to fall silent. Standing behind them, Nina Taylor narrowed her beautiful eyes behind her sunglasses, a cold smile curling at the corners of her lips. It seemed like Ethan Turner was stirring up trouble again. But did they really think everything would go their way? In my opinion. Nina Taylor suddenly spoke in a calm, clear voice from behind John Cena, her tone as crisp as morning dew. Eleanor Walker is a woman who appears soft on the outside but is incredibly strong and conflicted on the inside. On one hand, she sees her husband as her entire world, which is why she tolerates his blatant humiliation. On the other hand, she craves complete love, which leads her to despair when she learns of his infidelity and drives her to decide to jump into the lake. Nina paused briefly, noticing the director and crew members around her beginning to seriously ponder her words. The corners of her lips lifted slightly as she continued, "She's also someone not skilled in expressing herself. These complex emotions must be conveyed through the actor's expressions. I believe this is where the true test of an actor's ability lies." Both John Cena and assistant director Orton nodded in agreement, clearly impressed. This young woman, already somewhat renowned despite her age, had a unique and accurate understanding of the character in the script and the demands on the actor. Seeing the growing admiration in everyone's eyes, Nina raised her voice confidently, "Therefore, I believe Miss Charlotte here is completely unsuitable for this role." As soon as Nina Taylor finished speaking, the entire set fell into a stunned silence, quickly followed by a flurry of whispers. "Wow, what's the name of this screenwriter again?" "Shui Yang, right? She's so cool, I think I might be in love." "Exactly, look at Charlotte Smith's face, it's practically turned the color of pig liver. Serves her right for being so smug earlier. No wonder they call her the cold-blooded screenwriter. She doesn't hold back at all." With a screenwriter like this, the production feels much more trustworthy. Hearing the murmurs around her, Charlotte Smith was utterly humiliated, her face burning with shame as she shot a venomous glare at Nina Taylor. Chapter 10, Disfigurement. John Cena's expression at this moment was dark and uncertain. Charlotte Smith's acting had already been too obvious, even on set, her scandals were numerous. It was hard to imagine how much worse it could get once the show aired. However, the investor backing Charlotte Smith was no small figure either. Assistant Director Orton was also feeling a headache, resolving one issue only to face another. He whispered to Nina Taylor, "Shui Yang, Eleanor Walker is just a maid to the female lead. There's no need to be so strict. Charlotte Smith has some fame and is quite beautiful, she'll surely help boost our ratings in the future." Director Orton, "Eleanor Walker may seem like just a maid, but you know how it is, like master, like servant. If we choose the wrong person, it will definitely affect the portrayal of General Ian G later. I want to take responsibility for my work." Hearing this last sentence, John Cena's expression turned serious. Indeed, he had to take responsibility for his work. Charlotte Smith, hearing Nina Taylor repeatedly call her servant, and noticing the director's expression, realized this situation was looking grim for her. Furious, she screamed, "You wretch, I'll tear you apart." As she yelled, Charlotte Smith lunged at Nina Taylor with claws outstretched. Nina Taylor, having anticipated this, dodged to the side and discreetly pulled out her phone, activating the recording function. Charlotte Smith lunged too quickly and ended up crashing into a pile of lights. Crash! The filming equipment toppled to the ground. John Cena's face turned pale with rage as he barked at the security guard, "Take her down." But before the guard could approach, a sharp scream pierced the air. "Ah! My face!" Everyone around was horrified as they watched Charlotte Smith clutch her face, screaming like a madwoman. When she had fallen earlier, Charlotte only felt pain coursing through her body. Moments later, a burning sensation spread across her face. Reaching up to touch it, her fingers came away covered in blood. For a celebrity, her face was everything. She couldn't even begin to imagine what her future would look like. Wailing, she screamed, "An ambulance! Hurry! Someone call an ambulance for me! Shui Yang, you wretched woman, I'll never forgive you." Standing silently outside the crowd, Nina Taylor's cold gaze was hidden behind her tea-colored sunglasses. "Charlotte Smith, you've always schemed against me at the Turner household. This is your karma." Charlotte's curses faded as the ambulance drove away, leaving behind a wave of sighs. John Cena glanced at Nina Taylor, who stood quietly, looking frail like a frightened child. A pang of pity struck him as he tried to comfort her. "Shui Yang, it's okay. You didn't hit her, everyone saw that. Don't worry." Nina Taylor nodded, silently putting away her phone. After years of dealing with the Turners, she had long since learned to carve out her own escape routes. Assistant Director Orton, seeing the situation escalate to this point, decided not to press further. After all, it was Charlotte Smith's fault. Clapping his hands, he called out, all right, clean up and get back to work. Let's go." The film set returned to its usual hustle and bustle. Meanwhile, in City C, Mason Blake sat listening to the commotion from the film set through a wiretap. His long, slender fingers with well-defined joints tapped lightly on the desk. A faint, elegant smile played on his thin lips as his deep, ancient well-like eyes glimmered with a hint of amusement. "Little troublemaker, you're quite good at stirring things up." Xiao Zhao, standing nearby, couldn't help but shiver. Why does the young master's bright smile feel so unsettling? "This Mrs. Taylor. I can only silently support you in spirit." After the incident with Charlotte Smith, John Cena was no longer lenient. The process of selecting the next actor became extremely rigorous, with constant consultation with Shui Yang. Originally, the selection could have been completed by evening, but it dragged on until midnight. Declining the kind offers of a ride from the director and other staff members, Shui Yang slowly made her way toward the main road. Today had already drawn enough attention, she didn't want even her place of residence to be exposed. Lost in thought, Nina Taylor suddenly heard the sound of a ringing phone. It took her a moment to realize it was the ringtone of the screenwriter's phone. Somewhat puzzled, who would be calling to discuss the script at this hour, she adjusted her posture and answered with an elegant tone, "Hello, good evening." Chapter 11, Kidnapping. Waited for a moment, no one spoke. Nina Taylor frowned, picked up her phone to check the screen, and asked again, "Hello?" A soft chuckle came from the other end of the line, and immediately, deep eyes like an ancient well appeared in Nina Taylor's mind. "Young lady, have you thought about my proposal yet?" A deep, hoarse voice with a hint of coldness echoed through the night, carrying a faint, dreamlike quality. Nina Taylor pressed her lips together. This man had managed to find this phone number, something she hadn't anticipated. This also proved that he had thoroughly investigated her. But she didn't want to give in so easily and responded into the phone, "Sir, my uncle passed away a long time ago. Could it be that you've dialed the wrong number?" "Humph, take that." Sure enough, when Mason Blake heard this, his eyes narrowed slightly. "Nina Taylor, are you tired of living?" "Hello? What are you saying?" "Disconnect." Nina Taylor deliberately interrupted herself while speaking, then decisively hung up the call. Humph, stupid pig, the phone lost signal, don't blame me. Suddenly, her mouth and nose were covered by a cloth. It was the smell of ether. Nina Taylor tried to hold her breath and struggled a few times, but her vision quickly darkened, and she passed out. Splash! A bucket of ice-cold water was poured directly onto Nina Taylor's face and body. Mason Blake's phone suddenly burned with fury. That damned girl dared to play dumb and hang up on him. He thought for a moment and called again, but the call was promptly cut off. Mason Blake's expression turned extremely grim, and the atmosphere in the office seemed to freeze over. That's not true. That girl is the type to bully the weak and fear the strong. She wouldn't dare hang up on me. Thinking this, he dialed her number again. The call was answered almost immediately. Mason Blake's brows relaxed, and just as he was about to speak, he heard a man's voice on the other end of the line. "Little girl, blame yourself for offending someone you shouldn't have. Serve this big boss well, and I won't treat you poorly, ha ha ha." A cold glint flashed in Mason Blake's eyes. While listening closely to the commotion on the other side, he commanded Xiao Zhao, immediately track Nina Taylor's phone location. Also, search the film set area from this afternoon to find any trace of her. I need to know where she is within 5 minutes. Understood. Xiao Zhao dared not delay and quickly set off to locate her. Nina Taylor, hearing the kidnapper's words, shook her head in terror. No. She hadn't avenged her greatest grudge yet. Her ambitions remained unfulfilled. She couldn't let herself be destroyed like this. The kidnapper, excited, grabbed a recording device and approached Nina Taylor with a lecherous grin. He seemed to relish the look of fear on her face, continuously zooming in on her expression. Suddenly, Nina Taylor opened her eyes, a flash of hatred gleaming within them. Taking advantage of the kidnapper's momentary distraction, she lunged forward and knocked the recording device out of his hands. Smack! The kidnapper retaliated with a fierce slap across Nina Taylor's face, leaving a bright red handprint on her pale cheek. Chapter 12, The Rescue. The kidnapper's face twisted with rage as he saw the recording device crash to the ground and shatter into pieces. That device had cost him a fortune, specifically purchased for operations like this, and now this girl had ruined it. He glared at Nina Taylor with a ferocious expression, his voice dripping with malice. "You filthy woman, let's see how arrogant you are in a moment." With that, he lunged toward her. Rip! Nina Taylor's purple dress was suddenly torn apart. Her smooth, round shoulders were exposed to the air, trembling slightly. Bound tightly with ropes, only the upper part of her dress was ripped, but even that was enough to exude allure. The kidnapper's excitement reached its peak. He let out a lecherous laugh, squatting down and waving a pair of scissors menacingly over Nina Taylor's body. Terrified by his actions, Nina Taylor pressed herself tightly against the wall, not even daring to breathe heavily. Inwardly, she prayed fervently, whoever it was that called earlier, whoever it might be, even if they couldn't come to rescue her, please let them call the police. Ha! Still fantasizing that someone will come save you, huh? The kidnapper sneered, his tone dripping with mockery as he looked at Nina Taylor's trembling figure. Give it up. Be obedient, and maybe I'll go easy on you. With that, he set his phone aside and began cutting Nina Taylor's clothes with the scissors, muttering vilely under his breath, "As much as I'd love to pin you down right now, the client wants some pictures and videos of you first. He said he'll release the second payment once I send them. As for the final payment, well, that'll require some cooperation between us, my dear." Realizing what the kidnapper intended to do, Nina Taylor's eyes widened in horror, despair washing over her completely. But suddenly, a flicker of fierceness lit up in her mesmerizing almond-shaped eyes. Just as the kidnapper leaned in closer, she abruptly stood up. The kidnapper did not expect her to dare charge at him while he was holding scissors. Startled, he instinctively raised the scissors to block her. Thud! Nina Taylor only felt a sharp pain in her shoulder, but she still glared fiercely at the kidnapper with all her might. She knew the mastermind and the kidnapper didn't dare to kill her, they only wanted to ruin her reputation and purity. In that case, she would make them tremble in fear. The kidnappers were indeed terrified, but their anger surged. This wretched woman truly had a death wish. Smack! Smack! Nina Taylor was slapped hard twice, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth as she collapsed to the ground. Still unsatisfied, the kidnappers began kicking her relentlessly. Nina Taylor's entire body ached, her mind starting to drift into a haze. In her daze, she thought how wonderful it would be if a prince on a white horse came to save her at this moment. Just then, she caught a whiff of a cool, icy scent, and a deep voice, warm like Blue Mountain coffee, urgently rang out, "Nina Taylor." This was. Nina Taylor hazily opened her eyes, her vision slowly coming into focus. In those deep eyes, as profound as an ancient well, the usual teasing coldness was gone, replaced by worry. "So, you really are the prince on the white horse." With that, she faintly smiled and let herself fall into unconsciousness. Mason Blake looked at the unconscious woman before him, both exasperated and amused. Still able to tease him, seemed like things weren't too dire. Glancing at the wounds on her body, still bleeding, Mason Blake's handsome brows furrowed deeply. His eyes gleamed with icy murderous intent, and a faint, bloodthirsty smile appeared on his thin lips. Those who often followed Mason Blake knew that, at this moment, he was utterly furious. The kidnapper, knocked down by the man who had suddenly barged in, finally came to his senses and glared angrily at the figure before him. "You punk! Put that woman down! How dare you touch my woman?" Mason Blake turned his head, coldly gazing at the kidnapper. "Your woman?" Chapter 13, The Prince on the White Horse. The kidnappers were almost brought to their knees by Mason Blake's imposing aura. Their voices trembled as one of them stammered, "Whoever brings her here gets to keep her. Do you even know who I am?" "Ah!" Before the kidnapper could finish his sentence, Mason Blake kicked him, sending him flying into the opposite wall. Ugh! A mouthful of fresh blood spurted out. Officer Zhao, watching from the side, estimated that the man's ribs were likely all shattered. The kidnapper, now terrified out of his wits, saw Mason Blake carrying Nina Taylor. His soul seemed to leave his body as he ignored the sharp pain in his chest. Slapping himself across the face repeatedly, he begged, Master, I was wrong. Please, have mercy on me." Mason Blake coldly commanded, "Find out who orchestrated this and deal with them all." With that, he carried Nina Taylor and swiftly headed toward the car. "Understood, young Master Blake." Officer Zhao quickly responded, then turned to look at the kidnappers sprawled across the ground with a sneer. Daring to lay a hand on the young master's woman, he would make sure to handle this thoroughly. When the kidnapper heard someone address the man as, "Young Master Blake," he froze in place, completely dumbfounded. It was over, everything was over. At that moment, he regretted ever taking on the job from that woman. To dare touch young Master Blake's woman was a death sentence, there would be no place to bury him. Ack, ah. The sound of agonized screams echoed endlessly from the abandoned house. Black Mansion. Mason Blake sat at the bedside, looking down at the girl lying there. He hadn't expected that after removing her makeup, she would look so stunning. Yet at this moment, her exquisite face was pale from excessive blood loss. Her smooth forehead was dotted with sweat from the pain, and a few strands of hair clung to her cheeks, making her appear utterly frail. Seeing Nina Taylor in such a state, a flicker of distress crossed Mason Blake's eyes. No. No, stay away. Nina Taylor suddenly whimpered, her voice choked with sobs as she flailed her hands aimlessly in the air. Seeing this, Mason Blake immediately stepped forward and gently grabbed her restless hand to prevent her wounds from reopening. He called out softly, "Nina Taylor! Please, no. I'm begging you, don't, please spare me." Nina Taylor's voice trembled, tears streaming from the corners of her eyes. She looked like a pitiful little creature. Mason Blake's heart tightened painfully, his brows furrowing deeply. Who on earth had done this to the little girl? Today, the little girl resisted so fiercely, and even her long-term disguise, what was it all for? Mason Blake gently soothed Nina Taylor, as if holding the most precious treasure in his hands. He comforted her, "Nina, Nina, wake up, it's me." In his voice, cold as frost and snow, there was a tenderness he himself hadn't realized. Finally, under Mason Blake's tireless reassurance, Nina Taylor calmed down. Instinctively, she nestled her small face against him, only feeling at ease when her cheek pressed against his arm, allowing her to fall into a deep sleep. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows, illuminating the master bedroom of Black Mansion. Nina Taylor's butterfly-like lashes trembled slightly as she lay on the bed. She felt something tickling her cheek, like a soft breath. Slowly opening her eyes, the first thing she saw was a sharp, well-defined chin. Looking up, she was met with Mason Blake's strikingly handsome face, so perfect it seemed to defy reason. When Mason Blake slept, the usual teasing and domineering aura faded, replaced by a touch of gentleness and childlike innocence. Nina Taylor couldn't help but stare in a daze, momentarily forgetting to breathe. A teasing voice came from above her head, "Not breathing? Aren't you afraid of suffocating?" Mason Blake opened his deep, well-like eyes and looked at Nina Taylor with a faint smile. Seeing Nina Taylor still staring at him blankly, Mason Blake suddenly broke into a mischievous, childlike grin, and then, whoosh! He blew a puff of air right into Nina Taylor's face. The ambiguous atmosphere under the morning light and the allure of his handsome face instantly dissipated. All Nina Taylor could see now was Mason Blake's infuriating expression. "Why did you blow on me?" She glared at him, her voice full of indignation. "You looked so clueless, so I thought I'd give you some celestial energy to cross the river." So the legendary aloof young Master Blake was just a myth? Wait, this wasn't the time to dwell on that. Why are you sleeping in my bed? The last time she shared a bed with Mason Blake had left a deep scar on her psyche. She needed to sever all ties with him as soon as possible. Mason Blake said nothing, but his expression clearly screamed, "You're hopelessly clueless." Memories gradually returned as Nina Taylor blinked her large, peach blossom eyes and mumbled, "So you're the one riding the white horse, huh?" Chapter 14, Scandal. The beautiful, almond-shaped eyes sparkled with a hint of delight. "So then, even so, you still can't sleep next to me, can you?" Nina Taylor, for once, appeared shy. "If no one treats me like a wall to lean on, I don't mind switching beds." Mason Blake said coldly. Yesterday, seeing her shed her usual stubbornness and obediently nestle into his arms, he couldn't bear to leave her alone here. But he had to hold back all night, didn't he? Nina Taylor recalled her habit of always needing something to lean on while sleeping, her face flushing red. For a moment, she was too embarrassed to say anything. The room fell into an awkward silence. Knock, 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 a soft, rhythmic knock came from the door, clearly signaling someone well-mannered. Nina Taylor flinched, suddenly remembering her clothes from yesterday had been torn. She quickly lowered her head to check. Nightwear? 3 black lines seemed to appear on Nina Taylor's forehead, dripping down in frustration. After all, they had already slept together. Mason Blake observed all her actions and expressions, sneering as he said, "It's the maid bringing clothes for you." Nina Taylor's eyes lit up, her spirits instantly lifted, only to hear Mason Blake's irritating tone follow, "I'll stay here and watch." Nina Taylor. Mason Blake, you hateful jerk. Mason Blake had no intention of continuing the discussion with her on this topic. He lifted the blanket and tucked it snugly around her, leaving only her small head exposed, then called out, "Come in." Xiao Xiao opened the door, his eyes always cast downward, respectfully addressing Mason Blake, "Young Master Blake, everything has been taken care of. Please have a look." He was well aware of Mason Blake's concern for Nina Taylor, so he had rushed over early in the morning to report on yesterday's events. After Xiao Xiao left the room, Nina Taylor peeked her head out from under the blanket, looking at Mason Blake. By this time, Mason Blake had already gotten out of bed. This morning, he was wearing light gray lounge pants, his strong upper body bare, revealing solid muscles and a beautifully defined waistline. His long, slender hands held a newspaper that Xiao Xiao had just handed him, and he was reading it intently. Noticing Nina Taylor's curiosity, he handed the newspaper to her. On the front page, bold headlines stood out, "Starlet Charlotte Smith exposed as scandalous Charlotte Smith." Nina Taylor was slightly taken aback, as if realizing something. At that moment, Mason Blake had already turned on the TV. During the morning prime time, all channels were broadcasting the same news from the paper. The TV displayed footage of Charlotte Smith involved with various men, some scenes being extremely explicit. Not only that, the reports also revealed that Charlotte Smith had a tarnished reputation since childhood, bullying classmates. After entering the entertainment industry, she frequently resorted to dirty tactics to oppress newcomers. Shockingly, all these claims came with clear images and undeniable evidence. In the end, even her actions on the set yesterday were recorded in detail. Nina Taylor suddenly felt that using her mobile phone was utterly inadequate. The final scene stopped at Charlotte Smith in the hospital, her face still wrapped in bandages, screaming viciously, "You wretch, you won't die in peace. I'll kill you." Nina Taylor stayed silent for a moment, then lifted her head to look at the man beside her. Everything was crystal clear now, the kidnapping was orchestrated by Charlotte Smith. This man, who usually seemed so indifferent, had avenged her entirely in just one night. Nina Taylor's nose stung, and before she could shed a tear, the man looked at her with disdain and said, "If you plan to repay me with your body, you should at least grow up first. Right now, you look just like that kid, Wang Tiu." As he finished speaking, he waved a small bag of Wang Tiu snacks in front of her, which he had somehow gotten his hands on. Nina Taylor's overwhelming emotions vanished into thin air, her face scrunched up as if she had just swallowed a fly. Seeing her like this, Mason Blake's mood lifted immensely. His efforts to deliberately provoke her, even going as far as sending Xiao Xiao out to buy that silly snack, had paid off. Xiao Xiao, young master, you really have too much free time. After a long pause, Nina Taylor finally regained her composure and asked, so where is she now? She didn't believe Mason Blake would simply stop at publishing an article. LF. What's she doing at LF? You don't need to know. Mason Blake indifferently answered the question, then turned around and walked into the bathroom. Nina Taylor stared blankly at his retreating figure. Bringing a woman to LF, one could easily guess the purpose. In just one night, he could dig up someone's entire past, leaving her utterly ruined. He could discreetly toss someone into LF without anyone noticing. Just how powerful was this man? Nina Taylor felt that she was increasingly unable to see through him. Chapter 15, Provocation. When Mason Blake stepped out, he saw Nina Taylor still sitting there, lost in thought just like before, her face bewildered like a wandering fairy. His heart softened for a moment. He picked up a coat and gently draped it over Nina Taylor, his actions tender, but his words sharp. Fool, let's go eat. Nina Taylor. Do you think you're some senior master? Even if you are, I'm no pixie. In the end, she obediently followed him to eat. The dining table in the room was a long, vintage European-style one. When the servants saw the two of them coming down, they immediately set the food on the table and pulled out chairs on either side, inviting them to sit. Although she had a hunch, the grandeur of the breakfast still exceeded Nina Taylor's imagination. The table was filled with all kinds of dishes, even more lavish than the breakfast buffets she'd had at luxury hotels. Mason Blake, you're ridiculously extravagant. Who eats this much for breakfast? Are you some kind of spoiled rich kid? Mason Blake was about to take his seat but froze for a moment. His face darkened, and he ignored Nina Taylor entirely. Nina Taylor noticed his sudden shift in expression and felt puzzled. Can't even take a joke. The servant standing beside Nina Taylor covered her mouth, chuckling as she explained, Mrs. Taylor, you're quite humorous. The young master didn't know what you liked for breakfast, so he had us prepare a variety of options for you. Grace Howard. Mason Blake coldly called out, and Grace Howard immediately fell silent. Hearing this, Nina Taylor was momentarily stunned. She looked up at the man sitting across from her. It seemed as though the heavens had favored him, gifting him with a prestigious background, striking looks, and an extraordinary aura. Even the way he ate was so elegant, like a true aristocrat, so mesmerizing that one couldn't look away. Yet, for some reason, Nina Taylor felt a tinge of loneliness. Abruptly, she stood up. Mason Blake and the servant in the dining room were both startled. They saw Nina Taylor use her uninjured right hand to drag her chair, staggering toward him. Halfway there, she almost fell but was caught by Mason Blake. What are you trying to do? Mason Blake asked. Injured and still refusing to stay put. To sit next to you and have a meal with you. Nina Taylor said with a bright smile. Her face flushed from the effort just now, and her eyes sparkled brightly. For the first time, Mason Blake felt a little awkward, pursing his lips as he said, You're such a fool. Yet, the corners of his mouth involuntarily curved upward. Ring ring ring. Smack. The alarm clock screaming on the bedside table was decisively silenced by a fair hand. The room returned to silence. The next second, Nina Taylor jumped out of bed, late for class again. With finals approaching, Nina Taylor didn't listen to Mason Blake's advice. She only rested at home for one day before returning to School. She quickly applied some light makeup, grabbed a piece of bread, and dashed out the door. In the hallway, she bumped into someone. Sorry. Nina Taylor hurriedly apologized, but when she looked up at the person in front of her, she fell silent. Oh my, I wondered who it was. It's the great Miss Taylor. The speaker was Diana Sanders, a woman with a seductive appearance and a voluptuous figure. Occasionally, her design works won awards, and she liked to publish little love poems in the school newspaper, earning her the admiration of many male students who hailed her as a goddess of both talent and beauty. However, this so-called goddess seemed to enjoy making things difficult for herself year-round. The reason? Nothing more than her infatuation with Ethan Turner. Nina Taylor originally thought it best to keep her distance from people whose thought patterns didn't align with hers. She planned to nod casually and move on. Hey, where are you going? Diana Sanders reached out and grabbed Nina Taylor's injured left hand, stopping her. Nina Taylor winced in pain from the pull, frowning. Just a little tug on your hand, and you're already annoyed? Aren't you supposed to be a fallen noble lady with some manners? With your attitude, do you think you're worthy of someone like Ethan Turner? Diana Sanders sneered with contempt. At the mention of Ethan Turner, Nina Taylor's mood worsened. She was in a hurry to get to class and didn't want to waste time. Her voice turned cold as she said, "Let go." What if I don't? Diana Sanders replied smugly, surrounded by her loyal friends. What could Nina Taylor possibly do to her? Smack! Nina Taylor forcefully swatted Diana Sanders' hand away and said indifferently, "Filthy." Chapter 16, The Cancelled Design. Diana Sanders only felt a sharp pain in her hand. When she looked down, a red mark had already appeared on the back of her hand, and her anger flared up like a raging fire. Nina Taylor! You shameless wench, how dare you hit me? Nina Taylor kept walking straight ahead without stopping. Diana Sanders was so furious she could explode. She turned to her group of friends and gave them a signal. Immediately, one of them took advantage of Nina Taylor's distraction, grabbed her backpack, and threw it out the window. They were in the hallway on the 3rd floor, and below the window was the school's artificial lake. Nina Taylor, blocked by Diana Sanders' friends, couldn't react in time. She could only watch helplessly as her backpack fell into the water. Seeing Nina Taylor's expression, Diana Sanders felt a surge of satisfaction and laughed at her misery. Oh my, heartbroken, are we, Nina Taylor? Is there something precious in there? Or perhaps, your design draft? Nina Taylor's eyes turned bloodshot, like a demon emerging from hell, glaring intensely at Diana Sanders. Diana Sanders was momentarily shaken by that gaze but still spat out venomous words. What are you glaring at? That design draft of yours? It's not even good enough to use as toilet paper. Suddenly, Nina Taylor lunged at Diana Sanders and delivered a series of ferocious slaps to her face. Smack! 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 Diana Sanders' friends were completely stunned by Nina Taylor's crazed demeanor. After finishing with the slaps, Nina Taylor followed up with a kick that sent Diana Sanders sprawling to the ground. The rage over her ruined design, the fear from being kidnapped, and the humiliation she had endured in the Turner family over the years, all those negative emotions seemed to transform into her fists, which she unleashed furiously upon Diana Sanders. Diana Sanders soon passed out. Nina Taylor stood up, her entire being radiating an intense aura of hostility as she descended the stairs. No one dared to stop her. On the surface of the artificial lake, various stationary items and spices floated aimlessly, while the design draft had already sunk to the bottom. Nina Taylor's mood plummeted into despair. Over the years, to avoid the dark influence of the Turner family, she not only disguised herself as unattractive every day but also refrained from revealing any of her talents. Although during these years, she had achieved some awards using a different pseudonym, those accomplishments were still far from her aspirations. The jewelry design competition organized by Naya this time was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, but now that opportunity had vanished like smoke with the destroyed design draft. Nina Taylor bit her lip, rolled up her sleeves, and jumped into the artificial lake. The lake wasn't deep, but it was late summer, and the icy water sent a shiver down her spine. She struggled to search beneath the water. "What are you doing?" A deep, cold, and elegant voice, like Blue Mountain coffee with a hint of its owner's usual dominance, rang out. "Blake. Mason Blake? Why are you here?" Nina Taylor stood frozen in the lake, staring at the man before her. The man had a perfectly sculpted handsome face. Standing against the light, the morning sun cast a faint halo around him, combined with his regal aura, creating a breathtaking sight. Seeing Nina Taylor standing motionless in the icy water, Mason Blake grew even angrier. He frowned and asked, "What on earth are you doing?" I'm retrieving something." "Stop it. Just buy a new one." Clearly, she was already injured yet dared to enter the cold water. Saying this, he moved to pull Nina Taylor out. Nina Taylor quickly dodged his intrusive hand and continued searching, muttering, "Do you think everyone is as filthy rich as you? Do you even know how hard I worked to save up for these things?" The sound of rustling clothes being removed echoed near her ears, followed by a loud splash. Nina Taylor felt the world spin, and then she was lifted out of the lake. A coat was thrown over her head by Mason Blake, who instructed, "Wait here." When Nina Taylor removed the coat, she saw Mason Blake rolling up his shirt sleeves, bending down into the lake in the same posture she had been in earlier, searching for something. Clearly, he wasn't accustomed to such tasks. The all-powerful young Master Blake looked a bit clumsy at this moment. Yet, to Nina Taylor, young Master Blake at that moment resembled a true Prince Charming. After retrieving the item, Mason Blake brought Nina Taylor back to Black Mansion. What exactly happened? After seeing Nina Taylor change into clean clothes and finish a large bowl of brown sugar water, Mason Blake finally felt reassured and began asking for the full story. Nina Taylor hesitated for a moment, then briefly recounted the incident of her quarrel with a classmate, which caused her backpack to fall into the water. After listening, Mason Blake narrowed his eyes and asked, "Did the backpack contain the design you planned to submit for the Naya competition?" Nina Taylor was startled. Thinking about it, she realized that Mason Blake, being as perceptive as he was, guessing it wasn't surprising. She nodded, then dejectedly said, "Unfortunately, everything is ruined. The deadline for registration is almost here, and there's no time to redraw another one." "Oh, is that so? Is that so?" Why did this man's tone sound so indifferent? Her beautiful almond-shaped eyes glared at him. Seeing her childish reaction, Mason Blake's mood improved. He raised an eyebrow and said, "Then just submitted a bit late, problem solved." "Huh? Do you have a solution?" Nina Taylor's eyes instantly sparkled as she looked at Mason Blake. Chapter 17, Pulling Strings. Mason Blake was at a loss for words as he looked at Nina Taylor's suddenly flattering expression. Does this girl even have any limits? The Blake cooperation has always been in collaboration with Naya, Mason Blake said coldly. Nina Taylor immediately looked at Mason Blake with eyes shining as if she had discovered gold, like she was staring at a prime cut of premium meat. She knew the Blake cooperation was strong, but she hadn't expected it to be this powerful. Nina Taylor quickly put on a bright smile, beaming at Mason Blake so radiantly that it seemed flowers were blooming. She almost wished she could repay him with her life. Oh my! Young Master Blake, great young Master Blake, I must have been blind not to recognize your greatness. If you can't use idioms properly, don't use them at all. How does someone like this even become a screenwriter? Seeing that Mason Blake ignored her, Nina Taylor wasn't embarrassed and shamelessly continued to ask, so, can I take the backdoor route? Backdoor route? Mason Blake sneered, whose backdoor are you planning to take? Damn it! This guy is deliberately messing with me. For the sake of the competition, I'll endure it. She smiled and said, who else's backdoor could I take? Of course, I'd have to rely on you. Oh? Mason Blake glanced at her ingratiating smile, clearly unimpressed, and said with a devilish smirk, to take my backdoor route, who are you to me, ha? The final, ha, was slightly raised in tone, carrying an irresistible allure that made Nina Taylor falter. She froze for a moment. That's right, she was just an orphan with no one to rely on. What right did she have to expect the high and mighty young Master Blake to help her? But this competition was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, and she truly didn't want to miss it. Seeing Nina Taylor's conflicted expression, a trace of anger rose in Mason Blake's heart. Was it really so difficult for her to admit she was his woman? Just as he was about to press her further, she suddenly raised her head and flashed him a radiant smile. Mason Blake raised an eyebrow at her beaming face, his lips curling into a devilish grin. Had this little girl finally come to her senses? But in the next second, his smile froze. Because he heard Nina Taylor respond in a crisp voice, "You're my second uncle, of course." Mason Blake's eyes flashed with a cold glint, causing Nina Taylor to shiver in fear. She thought to herself, oh no, I've stepped on a tiger's tail. Mason Blake domineeringly declared, Nina Taylor, remember this, anything Mason Blake has used is absolutely off limits to others. I'm telling you, break off your engagement with Ethan Turner immediately. Used? Upon hearing Mason Blake's choice of words, Nina Taylor's anger flared instantly. Yes, she was poor, yes, she was an orphan with no one to love her, but that didn't mean she could be treated like a plaything forever. Though she hated Mason Blake to the point of grinding her teeth, she forced a smile and said, got it, second uncle is always the nicest to me. Humph. Knowing that Nina Taylor was pretending, Mason Blake let out a cold snort. Hearing his cold snort, Nina Taylor's heart sank. She bit her lip, lowered her head, and sat dazedly on the bed. It seemed like all hope was lost this time. But just as she was feeling dejected, thinking she had missed the opportunity to compete and wondering when she'd ever get another chance, she suddenly heard Mason Blake's icy voice, 10 days. Huh? Nina Taylor lifted her head in confusion to look at Mason Blake, still in a daze. Not enough. Mason Blake seemed a little impatient. 10 days? You're giving me 10 days? That's enough, more than enough, ha ha ha. Nina Taylor immediately beamed with joy, exclaiming loudly, Mason Blake, you're so cool. I love you to death. With that, she happily leaped into Mason Blake's arms, hopping and skipping around. Oh? Bold enough to confess your love so openly to your second uncle, huh? You're quite the daring niece. The corner of Mason Blake's mouth curled into a sly smile as he spoke. Quack. What was meant as a casual expression left Nina Taylor completely flustered by Mason Blake's words. She couldn't refute it, nor could she admit it. Why was this guy always so thick-skinned? And besides, how could a man smile so devilishly? Didn't he realize she was a sucker for good looks? What are you quacking about? Don't embarrass me. Mason Blake looked at Nina Taylor, whose face was now flushed red with embarrassment, and decided he'd teased her enough for today. No way, you can count on me. The moment the competition was mentioned, Nina Taylor became visibly excited. Mason Blake snorted again, reaching out to pat Nina Taylor's messy hair. Nina Taylor wasn't too pleased. She wasn't his son, nor was she his pet puppy, so who did he think he was patting? But for the sake of her future, Nina Taylor decided to play along and act obedient. Yet, life rarely goes as smoothly as one imagines. Chapter 18, 1 against 4. That evening, Nina Taylor developed a wound infection and came down with a high fever. Mason Blake immediately turned cold-faced, strictly forbidding her from participating in any activities other than staying home to recover, effectively confining her for 3 days. Today, Nina Taylor was finally granted permission by Mason Blake to lift her house arrest. As soon as she arrived at school, before she could enjoy her newfound freedom, the class president called her over. Nina, you've finally shown up. Why haven't you been answering your phone these past few days? Nina Taylor's lips twitched slightly, thinking to herself, how could she possibly explain that her phone had been confiscated by the great young Master Blake? My phone broke over the past couple of days, and I haven't had the chance to replace it. What's the matter? Class President Kevin Locke hesitated for a moment before explaining to Nina Taylor. 2 days ago, Diana Sanders' parents came to the school and caused a huge commotion. You know Diana Sanders can act so recklessly here because of her family's ties to the principal, right? So, the principal specifically instructed the department head to deal with this matter seriously. For the past 2 days, the department head has been looking for you. Hearing this, Nina Taylor frowned slightly. She was aware that Diana Sanders came from an influential family, but she hadn't expected them to be so brazen as to act like the victim while being in the wrong. Kevin Locke, being the class president, usually noticed how Nina Taylor was often alone and had always taken care of her. The two had developed a fairly good relationship. Knowing Nina Taylor's stubborn nature, Kevin Locke advised her, Nina, I know you must have your reasons, but when living under someone's roof, how can you not bow your head? You're just a student, how could you possibly go up against the principal? Go and have a proper talk with the department head, sincerely apologize, and don't let a moment of anger ruin your future. Nina Taylor bit her lip. Growing up in the Turner household, she had endured countless humiliations, and the phrase, can't help but bow your head, deeply irked her. However, she didn't want to disregard Kevin Locke's good intentions, so she nodded and smiled at her, saying, all right, I understand. Thank you. With that, she turned and headed toward the department head's office. There's no escaping this. The only way is to face it head-on. Standing in front of the department head's office door, Nina Taylor took a deep breath to calm herself. Just as she raised her hand to knock, she heard a man's arrogant voice from inside, then I'll leave this matter in your capable hands, Director Wong. Of course. The principal has already instructed me, and I'll make sure everything is handled to your satisfaction. The response came from Director Wong of the department, his tone completely unrecognizable from the sharp and harsh demeanor he usually exhibited. Instead, it was dripping with flattery to the extreme. "Then I'll trouble you no further. We'll take our leave now." Hearing that the people inside were about to come out, Nina instinctively wanted to step aside. But before she could move, the door swung open. The moment it did, both parties froze in silence. A sharp female voice immediately pierced through the air. "Nina Taylor! It's you!" The owner of this shrill scream was none other than Diana Sanders, the same person who had tried to frame Nina but ended up losing both her dignity and her leverage. Nina had retaliated so fiercely that day that even now, faint marks of her 5 fingers were still visible on Diana's face. At this moment, Diana was glaring at Nina with clenched teeth, pointing at her as if she could spit fire from her eyes. This was the woman who had humiliated her in front of their peers, and because of the injury on her face, Diana hadn't been able to attend school for days. Yet now, Nina Taylor was standing here so nonchalantly. On what grounds? Diana vowed to make her pay. If Nina knew what Diana was thinking, she would surely be speechless. Nonchalant? Hardly. She was clearly running out of patience. Director Wang, recovering from his initial surprise, suppressed his guilty conscience and sternly addressed Nina. "Nina Taylor, so you actually had the nerve to show up here. Not to mention the principal's orders to handle this matter strictly, Diana Sanders' father's influence and the thick envelope he had just slipped him were more than enough reasons for Director Wang to teach Nina a lesson." Moreover, Nina Taylor was someone nobody liked, plain-looking, poor academic performance, and defiant to the core. She was always challenging his authority. Today, he could finally settle both old and new scores. Just by glancing at Director Wang's expression, Nina understood everything. She smiled faintly and replied, "Of course, Director. Wipe that smirk off your face." Director Wang barked, trying to assert his authority. "Yes, sir," Nina answered crisply. The very next moment, her smile disappeared entirely, her face darkening. Her once bright almond-shaped eyes now gleamed with an icy sharpness that sent a chill down Director Wang's spine. Chapter 19, Finding the Parents. Diana Sanders was seething with anger, wishing she could tear Nina Taylor apart. However, in front of the teacher, she had to maintain her image. Clinging to the arm of a well-dressed man in a suit, she complained, "Father, it was her. She hit me. You must avenge me." Nina Taylor maintained a cold, indifferent expression, looking at Diana Sanders with disdain. Mr. Sanders scrutinized Nina Taylor for a moment before speaking. "Since Nina Taylor is already here, let's have a talk." With that, he led his wife and Diana Sanders into the office. As soon as the door closed, the head of the department immediately scolded Nina Taylor. "Nina Taylor, this is too much. You're always late, skipping classes, and failing subjects. But now, you've even dared to hit a fellow student and then skip school as if nothing happened. Do you even respect the school rules?" Nina Taylor lowered her head without responding. "Are you kidding me? For mouths against one, I couldn't win even if I wrapped my defense." Seeing her silent demeanor, the department head grew even angrier. Standing nearby, Diana Sanders noticed this and her eyes gleamed with malice. She smirked and suggested to the department head, "Mr. Wang, I don't think Nina Taylor can be disciplined anymore. Perhaps you should call her parents to discuss this. After all, when there's an issue with a student, parental involvement is necessary, isn't it?" Hearing this, Nina Taylor frowned. Diana Sanders' intentions were crystal clear. She wanted Nina to embarrass herself in front of Ethan Turner. Nina didn't care what Ethan thought of her, but she certainly didn't want to give the Turner family any chance to ridicule her. The department head considered Diana's suggestion and found it reasonable. He turned to Nina Taylor and said, "Then call your parents. If not, given your record, we'll have no choice but to expel you." Nina Taylor was so furious she laughed out loud. Fights and truancy were rampant at the school, yet no one else ever faced expulsion. It was clear they were bullying the weak. But she had worked so hard to get into this top design school, she truly didn't want to abandon her studies now. However, if she called the Turner family, who knew how they might take the opportunity to mock her or make demands? Hesitating, she picked up her phone and dialed a number. As soon as the call connected, a deep, lazy male voice, as smooth as Blue Mountain coffee, came through. "Miss me already?" This guy's shamelessness had reached new heights. Nina Taylor felt both angry and helpless, but right now, he was the only one who could help her. Forcing herself to sound as sweet as possible, she said, "Second uncle, could you come to my school for a bit? The teacher wants to meet my guardian." Mason Blake was already displeased when she addressed him as second uncle. Hearing the rest of her words, his eyes narrowed slightly. Clearly, someone was causing trouble for this little girl. Nina Taylor noticed the silence on the other end of the line and panicked slightly. It made sense. Why would the young master of the Blake family, a man who commanded the winds and rains in City S, lower himself to come to school and be lectured? Just as she was about to give up, Mason Blake's voice came through. 5 minutes. Then he hung up. Diana Sanders, still puzzled over who Nina Taylor's second uncle could be, noticed Nina's dark expression after ending the call. Delighted, she taunted, "What's the matter, Nina Taylor? Couldn't find anyone? Maybe you're just a worthless orphan nobody cares about." "Diana Sanders, you'd better shut that filthy mouth of yours, or I'll make sure you never open it again." Nina Taylor's eyes burned with fierce anger as she glared at Diana. "Say whatever you want about her, but if anyone dared insult her deceased parents, she would never forgive them. Taylor, watch your words." Mr. Sanders, who had been silent all this time, finally spoke, his sharp gaze fixed on Nina Taylor. "Honey, don't waste your breath on her. This kind of child clearly lacks proper upbringing. She dared to hit Diana, we must make her pay back 100-fold." Mrs. Sanders, seeing her daughter repeatedly suffer, could no longer maintain her usual elegance and snapped harshly. With someone backing her up, Diana Sanders grew bolder. She stepped in front of Nina Taylor and sneered, "What's wrong, Nina Taylor? Did I say something untrue? Aren't you just a wild child with no parents to discipline you? Maybe your parents died so early because you were the one who caused it." Smack! A slap rang out, stunning everyone in the office. None of them had expected Nina Taylor to dare strike at this moment. Chapter 20, Scalded with Boiling Water. Diana Sanders clutched her face, feeling a warm, damp streak. She brought her hand in front of her eyes to look at it, and finally couldn't hold back her emotions. She screamed, "My face! My face! Mom, she scratched my face! I want to kill her!" Mrs. Sanders looked at her daughter, her heart aching deeply, and scolded, "You little brat, how dare you hit my daughter? Watch me ruin your face." With that, she grabbed the kettle of boiling water that Director Wong had just heated and splashed it toward Nina Taylor. At that moment, Nina Taylor couldn't dodge anymore. She closed her eyes, thinking to herself, "This is it for me. Before losing her dignity, she was about to lose her appearance. Oh heavens, what did I ever do to deserve this? But the burning sensation never came. Instead, her nose caught the cool, refreshing scent unique to a man. Nina Taylor suddenly opened her eyes and found herself being held in Mason Blake's arms. His handsome face was right in front of hers, so close she could feel his breath. She panicked. The boiling water had clearly been thrown, yet she wasn't harmed at all. But what about Mason Blake, who had shielded her? Second uncle, second uncle. Are you okay? She asked anxiously, her small hands fumbling over his back. As expected, her hand landed on a damp patch. Nina Taylor's heart sank halfway. She quickly broke free from Mason Blake's embrace and ran behind him to check. A large section of Mason Blake's back was soaked, undoubtedly severely burned. Nina Taylor felt a lump in her throat, and the matter of calling parents had long been forgotten. Her voice carried a sob as she said, "Are you hurt? Does it hurt? We need to go to the hospital right now." Seeing her worried expression, Mason Blake's cold heart softened slightly. He patted Nina Taylor's head gently to comfort her. "I'm fine, don't worry." Then, Mason Blake hugged Nina Taylor tighter and turned to look at the others. If he hadn't arrived in time, the consequences would have been unimaginable. The young girl he cherished so dearly, how dare someone treat her so cruelly? His deep eyes carried a coldness and boundless killing intent as he swept his gaze across the people in front of him. Finally, his stare landed on the person holding the kettle, Margaret Sanders. Clang! Mrs. Sanders, who already regretted her impulsive act of throwing boiling water, felt a pang of guilt. Now, under Mason Blake's icy, murderous glare, she was so terrified that she dropped the kettle to the ground. The department head, already trembling with fear, could only muster the courage to step forward and stammer, "Sir, are you Miss Nina Taylor's second uncle?" As soon as the words were spoken, Mason Blake felt a small hand impatiently nudge his waist twice. The intention was too obvious, fearing he wouldn't cooperate with her. "All right." Though he was reluctant deep down, seeing how worried the young girl was for him earlier, he chose not to expose her. The department head inwardly wanted to scream. The glare from this man felt like it could kill him instantly. All he wanted was to lie down and play dead. Well, the thing is, Nina Taylor injured this student 2 days ago and skipped school. And then? Mason Blake, towering over the department head by a full head, looked down at him with disdain, like a lofty monarch, coldly questioning. "Nina. Then, well, she violated. You're a teacher at this school." Mason Blake interrupted the department head, his tone icy. Yes, I am." In Mason Blake's presence, anyone's aura would instinctively diminish. Seeing unrelated individuals harm your students, and you do nothing? Mason Blake's voice remained calm and steady, without any particular inflection, yet everyone present could somehow detect a hint of threat in his words. The department head wiped his sweat and stammered, it's because this student Nina Taylor hit my daughter first. My wife, in a moment of anger, acted irrationally. Please forgive her, Mr. Sanders interjected on behalf of the department head. Though it sounded like an apology, it carried no sincerity at all. Mason Blake held back the woman in his arms, who was about to step forward, gently comforting her. His indifferent gaze swept across Mr. Sanders. Others might not know, but Mason Blake had heard of the Sanders family in City A. If today's conflict had involved a more ordinary family, they would surely have had to yield. However, Mason Blake didn't regard them as worth his notice. He let out a cold laugh and said, "If apologies were enough, what would we need the police for?" Chapter 21, Automatic Expulsion. Hearing this, Mr. Sanders frowned. The young man in front of him looked to be only about 25 or 26 years old, but his aura was anything but ordinary. Just facing him casually brought immense pressure. "Sir, it was your niece who made the mistake first. Don't think you can take advantage of this. Otherwise." Mason Blake seemed to hear a ridiculous statement. The corner of his mouth lifted slightly, revealing a devilish smirk, but the smile didn't reach his eyes. He looked at Mr. Sanders and said with a cold, menacing tone, "Otherwise? What then? What does the Sanders family in City A plan to do?" Hearing his family background laid bare, Mr. Sanders was startled. However, seeing that the other party was so young, he assumed he was just some wealthy heir and dismissed it as nothing serious. With this thought, he sneered and said with contempt, "You brat! Such bold words! Do you think you are young Master Blake?" Mr. Sanders' words were abruptly interrupted by the sound of the principal opening the door. Principal Liu appeared at the office door, drenched in sweat and panting heavily, clearly having rushed over. His chubby face was plastered with a forced smile, but internally, he was trembling with anxiety. He had just noticed young Master Blake's car by chance. Upon inquiring, he learned that young Master Blake had come to their school and headed straight to the design department's office. Realizing the possible implications, he hurried over as fast as he could. Fortunately, he arrived in time, otherwise, his old friend might have been in serious trouble. "Old Lou, you came just in time. Ah, Mr. Sanders, you're really lucky. Coming to S City and running into young Master Blake, do you know how rare this is?" Fearing that his friend might say the wrong thing again, Principal Liu quickly cut him off. "Blake! Young Master Blake!" Mr. Sanders' face turned pale as if struck by lightning. The reputation of young Master Blake was something even he, at the A Corporation, had heard of. The Blake Corporation wielded power both in the underground and official circles, with an expansive business empire that could be described as world-dominating. And yet, they had just offended him to such an extent. Panicking, Mr. Sanders stammered, "Young Master Blake, earlier I know. Mr. Sanders wanted to teach me a lesson," Mason Blake said. If it weren't such an inappropriate moment, Nina Taylor would have burst out laughing. This man, how could he be so petty? This must be a misunderstanding, young Master Blake. Mr. Sanders was just joking. Please, you see. Principal Liu hurriedly tried to mediate. Joking? Mason Blake sneered coldly. So, in Principal Liu's eyes, I, Mason Blake, am someone who can be casually made the subject of others' jokes. This single statement left Principal Liu speechless, unable to muster the courage to plead any further. He could only look at his old friend with a gaze full of regret. Mr. Sanders realized he had thoroughly offended this powerful figure today. Gritting his teeth, he said, "Young Master Blake, it was our fault. I will have my daughter withdraw from school immediately." "Father, why?" Diana Sanders, still unaware of the gravity of the situation, screamed in disbelief upon hearing she had to leave school. Slap! A loud sound echoed as Mr. Sanders raised his hand and struck Diana hard across the face. His eyes reddened as he roared, "Apologize to Miss Taylor right now." "But slap, another strike. Apologize." Diana Sanders clutched her face, terrified as she gazed at her father, who had suddenly turned fierce. Feeling utterly wronged, she dared not utter another word. Mrs. Sanders, unable to bear it any longer, intervened. "Dear, you, slap." Mr. Sanders swung his hand and slapped his wife as well. "You dared to harm young Master Blake earlier. You foolish woman, apologize immediately." Mrs. Sanders was stunned, staring at her husband in disbelief. In her memory, he had never lost his temper like this. However, as an adult, she quickly realized the severity of the situation. She hurriedly pulled her daughter forward to apologize. "Yes, we're sorry, young Master Blake, Miss Taylor. It was our fault for being so blind." Mason Blake stood silently, watching their pitiful performance. He then turned to Nina Taylor, as if waiting for her decision. Under normal circumstances, Nina Taylor, having been bullied like this, would undoubtedly find a way to exact revenge. But at this moment, her focus was on Mason Blake's injury, and she had no desire to prolong the conflict. She softly said to him, "Second uncle, let's go home." Mason Blake raised an eyebrow, nodded, and said nothing more. The little girl chose not to pursue the matter, but Mason Blake couldn't let it slide so easily. He cast a sharp glance at the department head. Principal Wu immediately caught on. "Department head Wang, haven't you been mentioning your poor health lately? I think it's best you take an extended leave. Go back to your hometown and rest." The department head froze, collapsing into his chair in shock. Black Mansion. As soon as they entered the mansion, Nina Taylor hurriedly supported Mason Blake. Quick, take off your clothes." "Oh, I didn't know my dear niece was so lustful," Mason Blake said with a mischievous smirk. "This guy, what on earth is he thinking? You, what are you even thinking? I just want to check how the burn on your back is doing." Seeing her concern, Mason Blake's mood brightened considerably. Lazily, he began to take off his shirt. It must be said, the material of Mason Blake's suit was indeed of high quality. The burn on his back wasn't as severe as Nina Taylor had imagined. However, even so, when Mason Blake removed his shirt, Nina Taylor still saw a large red patch on his back. For some reason, Nina Taylor's heart suddenly ached. "Mason Blake, we should go to the hospital. I'm worried it might worsen later." "Feeling sorry for me, are you?" Mason Blake looked at her worried eyes and felt that such a minor injury was nothing, teasing her mischievously. "What are you saying? You got hurt because of me. Isn't it natural for me to be worried?" "Humph." Not receiving the response he wanted, the man suddenly turned cold. He sat shirtless on the sofa, lit a cigarette, and began to smoke. Nina Taylor felt a bit uneasy with his sudden change in attitude. She thought to herself, men's hearts are as unpredictable as the bottom of the ocean. Being near a king is like being near a tiger. "Damn it, I can't handle this." But looking at the reddened skin on Mason Blake's back, she still tried to persuade him, "Hey, let's go to the hospital." Mason Blake continued to smoke indifferently, clearly not wanting to pay attention to Nina Taylor. Nina Taylor felt helpless and could only start giving orders to the servants herself. Aunt Grace Howard, where is the medicine box in the house? Housekeeper Grace, does Mason Blake have a personal doctor? What's his phone number? Xiao Zhao, quickly. Before Nina Taylor could finish her sentence, she suddenly felt a strong pull. In the next second, she was sitting on Mason Blake's lap. "Be quiet." Mason Blake snapped irritably. "But you're back." "Shut up." Nina Taylor was fuming. She was this anxious because she was worried about him. Wait, no. She was this anxious because he got injured while saving her. But seeing Mason Blake's tightly furrowed brows, Nina Taylor obediently kept her mouth shut. Time passed, and when Miles Carter arrived at Black Mansion, he saw Nina Taylor sitting dazedly on Mason Blake's lap. While Mason Blake looked visibly annoyed. What on earth had happened during the time he was away? Miles Carter rubbed his chin, smiling meaningfully. Seeing the two of them still frozen in place even after his arrival, Miles Carter deliberately cleared his throat twice. Nina Taylor, who had been thinking of ways to convince Mason Blake to let her apply medicine for him, was startled by the sound and quickly jumped off Mason Blake's lap. Mason Blake glared at Miles Carter, only to be met with Miles Carter's cheeky grin. Nina Taylor assessed the young man who had just appeared before her, astonished that he could still grin so nonchalantly after being subjected to Mason Blake's predatory glare. Curious, she asked, and who might this be? Miles Carter, Mason Blake's cold voice sounded from behind her. Huh? Though she knew Mason Blake was always arrogant, calling someone useless right to their face seemed a bit much, didn't it? Miles Carter, noticing Nina Taylor's expression, immediately understood the misunderstanding. What could he do? It was all thanks to his father's great effort in naming him. He had been dealing with such reactions for 30 years now. At this point, he could smile calmly and say without a hint of embarrassment, "Hello, I'm Mason's personal doctor and close friend. Last name Carter, first name Miles. Here's my business card." As he spoke, he handed over an exquisitely designed business card. "Oh, thank you." Nina Taylor was a little surprised as she accepted the card. This was the first time she had encountered a doctor who handed out business cards upon meeting someone, and such a meticulously crafted one at that. When Nina Taylor saw the name, Miles Carter, on the card, she finally understood its purpose. Suppressing a laugh, she raised her eyes to take a closer look at the handsome man standing before her. Unlike Mason Blake's cold and devilish demeanor, Miles Carter exuded a gentle and approachable charm. His boyish face was always adorned with a cheerful smile, radiating warmth and friendliness that naturally drew people in. While Nina Taylor was sizing up Miles Carter, he was also observing the young woman in front of him. He and Mason Blake had been close friends since childhood, and he was well aware of how icy his friend typically was. The moment he stepped in and saw this woman casually sitting on Mason Blake's lap, he couldn't help but feel intrigued. With a playful squint, Miles Carter asked, "This young lady seems unfamiliar. May I know your name?" "I'm Nina Taylor." "So, Nina it is. Nice to meet you." The corners of Nina Taylor's mouth twitched. "Sir, I don't think we're that close, are we?" By this point, Mason Blake had lost all patience and asked irritably, "Why are you here?" "Oh, Mason, I rushed over because I was worried about your injury," Miles Carter said, clutching his chest dramatically as if in pain. At the mention of this, Nina Taylor suddenly remembered and hurriedly addressed Miles Carter. "Oh right, useless doctor, quickly check on him. His back has a large burn." Miles Carter now understood why his usually indifferent friend was paying attention to this woman. These two were a match made in heaven when it came to mischief. Casting a resentful glance at Nina Taylor, Miles Carter obediently went to examine Mason Blake's burn. Actually, for this good friend, such a tiny burn wasn't worth worrying about. After all, they had weathered storms and waves together. This little incident was nothing but child's play. However, seeing the young girl so anxious, he still seriously examined it once over. Before leaving, Miles Carter mysteriously pulled Nina Taylor aside and exaggerated Mason Blake's injury, finally instructing her to apply medicine to Mason Blake on time. Nina Taylor listened intently, which almost made Miles Carter burst out laughing. He thought to himself, "My old friend, seeing how unlucky you are in love, this is all I can do to help. You better seize the opportunity." Mason Blake stepped out of the room wearing a shirt and immediately saw Nina Taylor standing at the door, her head lowered, mumbling something. He walked over. As he got closer, Nina Taylor couldn't ignore the masculine aura that enveloped her, accompanied by a deep, warm male voice as refined as Blue Mountain coffee. "What are you looking at?" Chapter 22, The Trap. Nina Taylor was startled and looked up, not at all surprised to see Mason Blake's handsome face right in front of her. Her face immediately flushed red. Since he had just applied medicine, Mason Blake's body still carried a faint medicinal scent. His shirt was casually draped over him without being buttoned, and from Nina Taylor's angle, she could clearly see his delicate collarbone and well-defined 8-pack abs. Nina Taylor gulped audibly. There was no doubt about it. Mason Blake was the type who looked slim in clothes but revealed a muscular physique when shirtless. Even though Nina Taylor had seen it a few times before, it was still hard to suppress the surging desire in her heart. Mason Blake caught every bit of Nina Taylor's expression at that moment. His deep eyes, like ancient wells, now glimmered with a faint light. The corners of his thin lips curled into a devilish smile, and his lazy yet elegant voice, as smooth as honey, teased her ears. "Nina Taylor, do you want me?" As he spoke, he slowly leaned his handsome face closer to hers. She could even feel the scorching breath of the man on her face, and her breathing gradually quickened. At that moment, a thought suddenly struck her. She let out an "ah" and pushed Mason Blake away forcefully, lowering her head to look at the medicine bottle in her hand. Simultaneously, the temperature in the room seemed to plummet below freezing. When Nina Taylor realized what she had just done, she was startled by her own actions. Forcing a sheepish smile, she looked at Mason Blake, whose face had turned dark with anger, and stammered, "Uncle, I didn't mean to. Just now, that useless doctor kept reminding me not to apply the wrong medicine on you. I was just worried I might have remembered it wrong." Hearing this explanation, Mason Blake's murderous gaze softened slightly. He let out a cold huff but said nothing. This minor injury was nothing to him, but Nina Taylor's nervousness was evident. It didn't take much to figure out that it was likely due to one of his mischievous friends stirring up trouble. Still, seeing the little girl so concerned about him wasn't bad, so he decided not to blame Miles Carter this time. Thanks to Mason Blake stepping in, Nina Taylor no longer had to worry about getting penalized for skipping school. All she wanted now was to hurry back to her small apartment and prepare for her upcoming exam. After hearing Nina Taylor's request, Mason Blake didn't say a word. Instead, he instructed Xiao Zhao to lead a group of people to escort her back. Nina Taylor initially thought it was unnecessary to have so many people just to take her home, but when they arrived, she finally understood. It turned out moving houses actually required a crowd. And so, Nina Taylor had no say in the matter and was forced to move into Black Mansion. At first, she strongly protested, but Mason Blake shut her down with a single sentence. "So, my dear niece doesn't care about her uncle's injury, huh? She had no comeback for that. After all, it was her fault that he got injured in the first place." Today, Nina Taylor had just finished editing her competition entry. She was lying face down on the bed, listening to soft music with her eyes closed, when her phone vibrated with an incoming message. Picking up the phone, she saw it was from Ethan Turner. As expected, it was the same nauseatingly fake words. "Nina, are you still mad at me?" Right after reading that, another message came through. "I miss you so much. Today is my birthday party. Could you come and join?" Nina Taylor decisively ignored the message, holding her phone and waiting. Sure enough, a third message followed. "If you could come, it would be the best birthday gift I could ever receive." Nina Taylor sneered and curled her lips in disdain. After the big scene she had caused with the Turner family last time, Ethan Turner still had the audacity to use his sentimental tricks to lure her back. Truly thick-skinned. However, thinking about the unfinished matter she had in mind, she decided to make a return trip after all. Nina Taylor rummaged through her makeup stash, which she hadn't touched in a while, and skillfully disguised herself in front of the mirror. Her originally fair, flawless skin was now dull and blotchy, with a large birthmark added to her face. Her soft pink lips were coated with a thick layer of dark red lipstick, and two large buck teeth peeked out from behind her lips. She examined herself in the mirror from every angle, thoroughly satisfied with her masterpiece. Changing into a set of old, shabby clothes, she quietly slipped out. As soon as Nina Taylor stepped into the Turner household, a torrent of scolding came her way. "Nina Taylor, you're late again. Do you have any manners at all, keeping so many people waiting just for you?" Sophia Turner, who had been holding a grudge ever since Robert Turner scolded her because of Nina, immediately seized the opportunity to make things difficult for her. Nina Taylor glanced at Sophia Turner, who stood with arms crossed and hands on her hips, then flashed her two large buck teeth in a grin and said, "Oh my, little Sophia, today is your brother's birthday. How could I not dress up glamorously to attend?" "Humph." Sophia Turner sneered as if hearing a joke, mocking, "Glamorously? In those ragged clothes of yours? Is there something wrong with that?" Nina Taylor feigned confusion, fiddling with the hem of her pants. "But looking at little Sophia's outfit, isn't this a costume party?" "Huh? Are you out of your mind? What nonsense are you talking about?" "Sophia." Turner frowned at Nina Taylor. At that moment, Nina Taylor's almond-shaped eyes sparkled with sarcastic amusement as she replied, "I'm saying, little Sophia, your dog costume is quite convincing." "You? Little Sophia, what are you doing?" "Nina, you're here." Ethan Turner quickly put on an act, pretending to be surprised and delighted when he saw Nina Taylor. Nina Taylor lowered her gaze and obediently greeted, "Ethan." Ethan Turner felt a sense of satisfaction as he saw Nina Taylor obediently following his instructions. As expected, just a few days of ignoring her was enough to make her soft and compliant again. "Little Sophia, stop fooling around and quickly take Nina to get changed." "Nina, I personally picked this gown for you. Once you put it on, you'll look just like a princess. Tonight, I want everyone to see how deeply in love we are," Ethan Turner said with a gentle smile. Although Nina Taylor was used to Ethan Turner's overly romantic and cheesy words, she still couldn't help but shudder slightly. With a stomach full of questions, she headed toward the dressing room. This time, the Turner family had not only prepared a gown for Nina Taylor but also arranged for a professional stylist to handle her makeup and overall look. The gown itself wasn't particularly unique, but when Nina wore it, it perfectly accentuated her slender figure, especially her petite waist, as if it could be encircled with just one hand. Her messy, bird's nest-like hair was styled into an elegant updo, revealing her smooth forehead. A veil matching the color of the gown covered her face, hiding her prominent buck teeth and leaving only her stunning almond-shaped eyes visible. Nina Taylor's lips twitched as she asked the makeup artist, "Isn't this makeup a little too bizarre?" The makeup artist sneered, pursing her lips in disdain. Her hands moved dramatically as if painting in midair. "Mrs. Taylor, if you don't understand art, don't make random comments. Mr. Turner specifically instructed me to make you look beautiful today. Honestly, do you think I have any other way to make you look less unattractive?" After pretending to be plain for 10 years, Nina Taylor regretted, for the first time, designing such an irredeemable appearance for herself. When Nina Taylor stepped out of the dressing room, she left everyone waiting outside utterly stunned. Sophia Turner's face showed clear resentment. She hadn't expected Nina Taylor, with just a simple makeover, to look this breathtaking. Even Ethan Turner was momentarily dazed. For the first time, he sincerely complimented her, "Nina, you're truly beautiful." Ethan Turner thought to himself, "If you look this stunning even after removing the veil, I might just hesitate to go through with tonight's plan." Ethan took a step forward, wrapping an arm around Nina Taylor's waist. Feeling her soft body stiffen slightly in his embrace, he chuckled and said, "Don't be nervous. I'm here with you." Nina Taylor had already started feeling a deep sense of unease from the moment the stylist began working on her hair. The Turner family always liked to humiliate her, fearing that she might show any signs of excellence. Today, they had meticulously dressed her up like this, clearly with some ulterior motive. Though she thought so, she still tried to put on a gentle smile for Ethan Turner and walked with him into the banquet hall. The Turner family in CDS, though not among the top aristocratic families, had some reputation. Therefore, the birthday party for the eldest son of the Turner family this time was organized grandly, with most local businessmen in attendance. At that moment, Robert Turner was chatting with a man as plump as a white bun. "Mr. Cole, this batch of agate you have is truly rare. Would you consider selling it to me? I assure you, I won't let you suffer any losses in terms of price." "Ha ha ha, Mr. Turner, I've heard many people say the same thing. If you want something others don't have, you'll need to come up with a more creative offer," Mr. Cole replied nonchalantly. Just then, Mr. Cole's small, bead-like eyes suddenly lit up. He turned to Robert Turner and asked, "Mr. Turner, who is the young lady beside your son?" Robert Turner quickly introduced, "This is my son's fiancée. The engagement between our two families was arranged when they were children. Her parents passed away in a car accident when she was young, so she's been raised in our Turner family." "Oh, I see," Mr. Cole nodded, pretending to understand, then smiled slyly. "Mr. Turner, the earlier matter isn't entirely without room for negotiation. It just depends on whether you're willing or not." This. Robert Turner saw that Mr. Cole had taken the bait and felt ecstatic inside, but outwardly, he put on a conflicted expression. "Mr. Cole, her father, and I were good friends. How could I possibly do such a thing? If Mr. Turner isn't willing, then let's forget I said anything. This batch of agate is extremely rare. Once it hits the market, it will undoubtedly cause a frenzy." "I'm not worried about you not giving in," Mr. Cole said confidently. As expected, Robert Turner quickly responded, "Mr. Cole, let me think about it." Shortly after, everyone noticed his face showing a struggle. After thinking for a long time, he finally said, painfully, "All right, Mr. Cole, you must keep your word, and don't go too far." "Haha, rest assured, Mr. Turner. I'm someone who knows how to cherish beauty. I'll wait for your good news then." With that, Mr. Cole cheerfully went off to chat with other businessmen. Robert Turner approached Helen Turner and whispered, "It's done." Helen Turner's face lit up with joy, then she sneered maliciously, "That little girl, if she dares disobey, let's see how she'll have the face to stay in the Turner family after tonight." "All right, stop talking so much. Handle this well and don't let anything go wrong." "Don't worry, dear. It won't," Helen Turner replied with a smile. "By the way, that Richard Cole is so strange. Why does he always like to snatch young men's girlfriends for one-night stands? Luckily, we have Nina Taylor as a backup." Poor Ethan. Poor. Once this deal succeeds, we'll obtain the manuscript left by Selina Taylor. By then, the Turner Corporation will grow stronger, and he'll be the heir. He can have any woman he wants. Why care about temporary reputation? Robert Turner lectured. "Yes, dear, you're always right," Helen Turner agreed obediently. Despite her aggressive demeanor outside, she acted like a docile kitten in front of Robert Turner. Unlike the Turner's delight, Nina Taylor's mood was extremely heavy at the moment. Not long after entering the banquet hall, she began to feel unwell. After informing Ethan Turner, she quickly rushed outside. Chapter 23, Nina Taylor's Secret. Since the time she was framed by Charlotte Smith, Nina Taylor had become much more vigilant, yet she still couldn't understand how she had fallen into another trap. Robert Turner hid in the shadows, watching the scene unfold with a sinister smile. "Father, as long as Richard gets Nina Taylor out of the main door of the Turner family, everything will be settled," Ethan Turner whispered beside Robert Turner. You've handled this well, Ethan." Just as the father and son of the Turner family were feeling smug, thinking everything was under their control, they suddenly sensed something unusual in the atmosphere of the banquet hall. At the entrance, Richard, who had been strutting around arrogantly, suddenly fell flat on his back, screaming like a pig being slaughtered. Who dared to hit me, Richard Cole?" The man standing opposite him had already swept Nina Taylor into his arms. His cold eyes stared at Richard Cole as if looking at a dead man. "Mason Blake." Robert Turner immediately recalled the time Mason Blake had come to the Turner family to back up Nina Taylor. At that time, he had assumed Mason Blake was merely acting on a whim. After all, the young master of the Blake family in City S was famously aloof. Robert Turner never thought Mason Blake would genuinely care about someone over an old connection. Now, it was clear he had been completely wrong. Robert Turner quickly stepped forward and quietly asked, "Young Master Blake, what brings you here?" Mason Blake gave Robert Turner a cold glance, his sharp eyes seemingly piercing through him. Ethan Turner stepped up, pretending to have just noticed Nina Taylor, and exclaimed in shock, "Nina, what happened to you?" Mason Blake's icy gaze fell on him. "What happened to her? I think the eldest young master of the Turner family should know best." Ethan Turner was instantly at a loss for words, unable to come up with a reply. Richard Cole had no time to cry out before collapsing unconscious. Mason Blake cast a final glance at the Turners before turning away. The little girl's condition was critical, she needed immediate medical attention. Everyone in the hall was utterly horrified. In broad daylight, someone had been crippled. How could anyone remain calm? "Who do you think that man is?" someone whispered amidst the crowd. "Shh, don't ask questions you shouldn't. If you value your life, don't breathe a word about what happened today." "You mean, is he really?" "Enough. Don't say another word." Black Mansion. Miles Carter rubbed his nose, still marveling at the fact he'd been summoned to the Black Mansion twice in just 1 week. Looking at the beauty lying on the bed, he stroked his chin with a sly grin. Things were turning out to be far more interesting than he had imagined. Idiot, I called you here to treat her, not to ogle her. Hurry up, fix her, and get lost. Mason Blake snapped, clearly irritated by Miles Carter's lingering gaze on Nina Taylor. My, Mason, when will you ever stop burning bridges after crossing them? Miles teased with a gossipy smirk. By the way, your Miss Nina Taylor is so stunning, why bother going to such lengths? To disguise her beauty? What's the point of it all? Miles Carter, an exceptional physician with keen observational skills, had already noticed Nina Taylor's disguise during their last encounter. Now, seeing her real face, he was taken aback by her breathtaking beauty. This discovery only fueled the ever-burning fire of curiosity within him. Mason Blake responded with nothing but a cold snort. Miles Carter blinked his large eyes, then suddenly exclaimed in astonishment, Mason, don't tell me you don't even know about this. No sooner had he spoken than Mason shot him a fierce glare. Miles Carter instinctively rubbed his nose, realizing he might have poked the tiger. Without hesitation, he made a quick escape. Mason Blake sat by Nina Taylor's bedside, watching her restless expression as she slept. He roughly understood Nina Taylor's connection to the Turner family, but he could never figure out why she had to disguise herself. However, seeing how the Turner family repeatedly targeted her, there was undoubtedly some hidden truth he had yet to uncover. Mason Blake picked up the phone. Xiao, investigate everything about Nina Taylor's life from birth until now. Remember, do not overlook anything. At this moment, Nina Taylor was restless in her sleep, as if she were reliving something terrifying in her dreams. When her parents had just passed away, Nina Taylor was overwhelmed with grief and fear. So, when the Turner family moved in with her, she initially felt happy. But the Turners soon dropped their kind facade from when her parents were alive and began treating her with cold indifference. At first, Nina Taylor thought it was because she had been too willful before, which made the Turners dislike her. Until one day, she overheard a conversation between Robert Turner and Charlotte Smith. Honey, we've already successfully taken over the Taylor Corporation, so why do we still have to keep that little girl around? Just seeing her reminds me of Selena Taylor's self-righteous attitude, it's so irritating. Charlotte Smith's tone was as venomous as ever. You don't understand. Although we've taken over the Taylor Corporation, the most valuable thing from it is still not in our hands, Robert Turner replied. The most valuable thing? Are you talking about Selena Taylor's manuscript? Isn't that rumored to be just a myth? If it really exists, why haven't we found it yet? Helen Turner asked skeptically. That manuscript definitely exists. Selena Taylor was always cautious, so she must have hidden it somewhere. I suspect the clue lies with Nina Taylor. Robert said with certainty. Ah, I see. Helen Turner's lips curled into a sinister smile. Humph, that little Nina Taylor better behave herself, or she'll see how I deal with her. Don't go too far, Robert Turner frowned. It wasn't out of compassion but rather because he worried his short-sighted wife might ruin his plans. Thinking back, if Helen Turner had not been unable to suppress her disgust towards Selena Taylor, it wouldn't have led to Selena Taylor's suspicion, causing the draft to be hidden. Little Nina Taylor was utterly horrified upon overhearing this conversation. She had always believed that the reason the Turner family didn't love her was because she was stubborn. She never imagined that her uncle and aunt were such cunning and heartless people. Mom, lower your voice. Nina Taylor was even more shocked. It was Ethan's voice. He was also involved in this. What are you afraid of, Ethan Turner? That girl has already cleaned the entire mansion today. By now, she's probably sleeping like a log. How could she possibly eavesdrop on us? Haha, Nina Taylor is still such a cute and lovely little girl. I wouldn't go that far, Ethan Turner said as though pleading, but his tone was brimming with smugness. Ethan Turner, why do you even bother keeping up the facade of being a good brother in front of me? I know very well that you hate her the most. Just thinking about how our Turner family has to raise such a useless girl makes my blood boil. Making her do chores is already too good for her. It's no big deal. Ethan Turner didn't seem to care, much like his father, thinking his mother was short-sighted. Although Nina Taylor is still young, it's clear that she'll grow into a beauty. In our circle, there are so many older men who fancy young girls. When the time comes, we'll have her serve those men well and contribute to our business dealings. Wouldn't that solve everything? Oh my, you truly are my son. So young yet already business-minded. Helen Turner looked at her son with such pride that she could barely resist rushing over to kiss him. Robert Turner also gazed at his son with admiration, nodding in approval. In stark contrast to the harmonious and cheerful family scene, Nina Taylor stood outside the door, feeling as if she had been plunged into an icy abyss. Her once loving uncle and aunt, her once caring brother Ethan, were nothing but monsters in disguise. From that day on, Nina Taylor began having frequent nightmares of being approached by middle-aged men. To protect herself, Nina Taylor, with the help of her best friend Emma Harper, secretly devised a plan to become ugly. And thus, the current unattractive Nina Taylor came to be. The events in the hall today felt like a nightmare she had long dreaded coming true. In the fleeting moment before she lost consciousness, Nina Taylor thought in despair that, in the end, the Turner family had achieved their goal. This time, not even Mason Blake would make it in time to save her. That's why, when Nina Taylor opened her eyes and saw Mason Blake, she thought she was dreaming. Mason Blake, at that moment, had his back turned to Nina Taylor. He was standing by the bed, speaking softly on the phone, as if afraid to wake someone. I need results within 3 days. After hanging up, Mason Blake turned around and saw Nina Taylor staring blankly at him. He narrowed his eyes slightly, the corners of his mouth lifting into a teasing smile. Good girl, did you sleep well? Although he was smiling, Nina Taylor, who had experience living with Mason Blake, knew very well that he was angry. Any remaining drowsiness vanished completely. Nina Taylor was fully awake and forced a nervous smile. Haha, it's fine, it's fine. Oh, Uncle, have you eaten yet? The moment those words left her mouth, Nina Taylor wished she could bite off her own tongue. Why did her brain always freeze whenever she encountered Mason Blake? You still have the mood to care whether I've eaten or not. Such a considerate niece, he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. The words, considerate, were spoken softly, yet they pressed down on Nina Taylor's chest like a 1,000-pound weight. Oh no, she was doomed. She had sneaked into the Turner household while Mason Blake was away, and on top of that, got caught in that incident. The domineering devil Mason Blake was bound to explode with anger this time. Why did you sneak into the Turner household? Mason Blake asked coldly. Chapter 24, Nina Taylor still has her pride. Today, if he hadn't come home early and discovered her sneaking around to the Turner family's house, feeling uneasy and deciding to check it out, the consequences would have been unimaginable. Ethan Turner asked me to attend his birthday party. He asked you to go, and you just went?" Mason Blake's voice was filled with danger. Nina Taylor hesitated for a moment, then softly said, "He said he wanted to announce the engagement between him and me." "Engagement? You still want to marry him? Do you like him that much?" "Yes." Nina Taylor gritted her teeth and replied. Mason Blake coldly declared, "Cancel the engagement with Ethan Turner immediately." "No." Nina Taylor's chin was firmly gripped by Mason Blake. His deep eyes, like an ancient well, seemed to hold a dark whirlpool threatening to pull her in, making her heart tremble. "Nina Taylor, I've said it before, anything Mason Blake has touched, even if destroyed, will not be allowed to be touched by anyone else. Don't even think about marrying another man." At this moment, Nina Taylor was also provoked. Ignoring the pain in her chin, she glared at him with her large, almond-shaped eyes and firmly said, "Mason Blake, I've told you before, I am not your toy. You have no right to dictate my life. Ethan Turner, I will definitely marry him." The death of her parents, her own grievances, could not be overlooked. Naturally, she didn't want to marry Ethan Turner. But if she resolved the engagement now, wouldn't all her efforts be in vain? Mason Blake stared darkly at the angry, puffed-up face of the girl before him. Suddenly, he pressed her down onto the bed and bit her shoulder hard. Nina Taylor felt a sharp pain in her shoulder and struggled desperately but couldn't break free. She shouted angrily, "Mason Blake, you dog, let me go." Mason Blake only released his bite when he tasted the metallic tang of blood. He looked down at Nina Taylor, whose face was flushed beneath him, and harshly said, "Nina Taylor, now I will show you who truly controls your life." With that, he tore her clothes. When Nina Taylor woke up again, the room was empty. Last night, Mason Blake had demanded her over and over again, to the point where she had nearly fainted by the end. The marks of his madness were still visible on her body, filling her with humiliation. Nina Taylor buried her head in the blanket, unable to stop her tears from flowing. No matter how hard she tried, in the eyes of others, she was still just a toy to be manipulated at will. "Mom, Dad, why did you leave me so early? If you were still here, no one would dare to bully me. Mom, Dad, I miss you so much." When Mason Blake returned to the room, he saw Nina Taylor burying her head under the blanket. Assuming she was still sulking like a child, he didn't pay much attention. But after a while, he noticed that Nina Taylor hadn't moved at all. Walking over, he pulled the blanket back and saw Nina Taylor's flushed face, her forehead dotted with sweat. Mason Blake reached out to touch her forehead, it was burning hot. "Damn it, you're sick, and you didn't say anything earlier?" Mason Blake hurriedly called Miles Carter. And so, within a short week, Miles Carter arrived at Black Mansion for the 4th time. After examining Nina Taylor, Mason Blake immediately asked, "How is she?" Miles Carter raised his head and shot his good friend a glare. "How is she? What do you think? Her body's already weak, and she's been repeatedly frightened, injured, and hasn't fully recovered from the sedatives. On top of that, someone here." "Mason, listen, I know you're in your prime and it's hard to control certain needs, but you should at least consider her condition and emotions, shouldn't you? Weak constitution? Why is that? How do we fix it? When will she recover?" Completely ignoring Miles Carter's rambling, Mason Blake cut straight to the point with the questions he cared about. Interrupted, Miles Carter was visibly annoyed. Even though he knew his friend was doing it on purpose, he could only sigh and reluctantly respond, "I've already given her a fever-reducing shot." She'll probably be fine after sweating it out tonight. As for her weak constitution, well, Mason, that depends on whether you know how to take care of her. Take care of her? Mason Blake walked downstairs. Grace Howard, come here for a moment. Nina Taylor woke up again, and it was already the next morning. As soon as she opened her eyes, she heard someone next to her ask, "You're awake, are you hungry?" Nina Taylor drowsily nodded, waking up due to hunger. Soon, a delicious aroma wafted into her nose, causing her small nose to twitch slightly. Feeling something warm brought to her lips, Nina Taylor instinctively opened her mouth. The moment it entered her mouth, it was chicken porridge, her favorite. The rich yet not overwhelming flavor slowly brought her mind back to clarity. As the first spoonful slid down her throat, the second one was already on its way. By now, Nina Taylor was fully awake. Without even looking up, she knew the person attentively feeding her porridge was none other than the culprit behind her current illness. Nina Taylor immediately shut her eyes tightly and pressed her lips together. Mason Blake frowned and said calmly, "Eat." Nina Taylor continued to keep her eyes shut, feigning death. Even if she was starving, Nina Taylor prided herself on having dignity. Growl, Mason Blake. At this moment, Nina Taylor wished she could find a hole to crawl into. However, she maintained her playing dead expression. Mason Blake looked at her small face, flushed with anger despite her closed eyes. Suddenly, he no longer felt upset. In fact, he found her current appearance quite charming. If not for her frail condition, he might have been tempted to engage in some morning exercise with her. Though Nina Taylor kept her eyes shut, her ears were perked, listening for any sounds. Oh no, it had been so long, and there was still no sound. Could it be that she had truly angered this great demon king? This is bad, this is really bad. This demon king was known for his terrifying methods. She had repeatedly provoked his authority. Would he snap, ravage her, and then dispose of her body in some desolate field? At this thought, Nina Taylor quickly opened her eyes, only to be greeted by the magnified, handsome face of the young Master Blake right before her. Mason Blake smirked faintly and said, "What's this? Not pretending to be dead anymore?" Nina Taylor's lips twitched. Fine, she'd admit she was at fault first. But he was the one who made her sick. Couldn't he show a bit more kindness and let her sulk for a while? "I'm not hungry," Nina Taylor grumbled irritably. "Your stomach was growling just now." I'm not in the mood to eat." "Oh?" Mason Blake said coldly, "So, you want me to feed you with my mouth? I didn't expect my obedient little niece to go this far just to seduce me." Nina Taylor shot up, glaring angrily at Mason Blake, her face flushed with fury but unable to retort. In the end, she succumbed to Mason Blake's usual authoritative demeanor and reached out to take the bowl. However, Mason Blake avoided her hand without a trace of emotion and scooped a spoonful of porridge, bringing it to her lips. Nina Taylor froze for a moment, then absent-mindedly opened her mouth to eat. By the time the bowl was empty, Nina Taylor still couldn't wrap her head around it. Her hands and legs were perfectly fine. Why on earth was Mason Blake feeding her? Could it be that the tyrant had suddenly changed his ways? Or perhaps he enjoyed being mistreated? Seeing her obedient expression, Mason Blake nodded to himself in satisfaction. It seems that the methods taught by Aunt Grace Howard were indeed effective. Women needed to be trained like this. Ever since Nina Taylor had secretly attended the Turner family's party and almost been taken advantage of by that scoundrel Cole. Mason Blake had placed her under house arrest. When Emma Harper called to invite her out shopping, Nina Taylor had to plead with young Master Blake for over an hour before finally earning his permission, but only under the condition that she returned home by 7 p.m. sharp. Nina Taylor nearly wanted to kneel and thank him for his boundless grace right then and there. Dressed in a white t-shirt, jeans, and a ponytail, Nina Taylor admired herself in the mirror. Even with a bare face, she looked radiant and lovely. Filled with excitement, she headed out. It was rare for her to go out without having to deliberately dress down, so Nina Taylor's mood was especially cheerful. The moment she saw Emma Harper, she couldn't wait to rush over and hug her tightly, exclaiming excitedly, "Emma, I've missed you so much." Emma Harper raised an eyebrow and remarked, "Nina Taylor, your outfit looks like a pig climbing a tree." Nina Taylor immediately jumped out, angrily saying, "Emma Harper, who are you insulting?" Emma Harper shrugged and replied indifferently, "Don't overthink it. I just feel like a tree." Nina Taylor. It truly is karma at work. Thinking about how Nina Taylor had always prided herself on being able to out-argue a crowd since childhood, yet ever since meeting Mason Blake, she kept encountering setbacks. And now, she was left speechless by Emma Harper. Seeing Nina Taylor's cheeks puff up like steamed buns, Emma Harper comforted her, "Come on, I was just teasing you. Don't be mad anymore, let's talk about the main issue." Once Nina Taylor's expression returned to normal, Emma Harper seriously asked, "Didn't you say you were sick? Why do you look like you've gained weight?" Nina Taylor. Is it still possible for me to crawl back into my mother's womb and sever ties with you? Annoyed as she was, Nina Taylor knew what Emma Harper was concerned about. Pouting, she said, "If you want to ask what's been going on with me lately, just ask directly. Why beat around the bush like that? I don't even know who you take after with this personality of yours." Mrs. Harper and Mr. Harper were both lively, outgoing, and straightforward people. Heaven only knew how they ended up with a reserved daughter like Emma Harper. Emma Harper focused on sipping her coffee, pretending not to hear Nina Taylor's complaints. Seeing that Emma Harper had no intention of paying her any attention, Nina Taylor began recounting all the recent events to her. After listening, Emma Harper remained silent for a long while before saying, "I don't know. It's fine, it's fine." Nina Taylor interrupted Emma Harper, waving her hand dismissively. "You know how the Turner family operates. Do you really think Charlotte Smith could have pulled off the drugging incident all by herself while staying at the Turner household? The Turner family has had malicious intentions for ages. If it's not today, it'll be tomorrow. Can you always step in and help every time?" Emma Harper's brows were still furrowed. When Nina Taylor had called her after being drugged by Charlotte Smith, she had been conducting lab experiments. Her phone had been set aside, and she hadn't heard it. When she called back later, Nina Taylor had said it was nothing, and Emma Harper had carelessly believed her. Understanding that Emma Harper was blaming herself, Nina Taylor pretended to be nonchalant and patted her on the shoulder. "It's no big deal. Look at me, I unexpectedly ended up with Mason Blake." Mason Blake. The most prominent young master of the elite Blake family in City S. Do you know how many women are jealous and wish they could strangle me in their dreams? After saying that, Nina Taylor suddenly covered her chest with both hands, feigning horror. "Don't tell me you're jealous too." Emma Harper looked at Nina Taylor with a face full of disdain. Emma Harper had always felt that Nina Taylor's way of comforting others seemed somehow off, ever since they were kids. Letting out a sigh, Emma Harper asked, "So, that golden boy, the esteemed young Master Blake of yours, does he treat you well?" Nina Taylor paused for a moment, pondering, then replied, "I'm not sure. If I say he's not good, well, every time I get into trouble, he's the one who helps me out. But if I say he's good, he spends all day figuring out ways to exploit me. He's both domineering and authoritarian. Maybe, to him, I'm just a toy, something he won't let others touch once he's claimed it." Then, Emma Harper hesitated for a moment before asking, "About the Turner family matter, do you still want to continue with it?" Chapter 25, Love at First Sight. "Of course, I want to," Nina Taylor resolutely said. "Emma, you know, the Turner family has treated me like this. If I wanted to escape, I could have done so long ago. The reason I've waited until today is that I must uncover the truth about what happened back then." "And what about Mason Blake?" Emma Harper asked. This was precisely what had been troubling Nina Taylor. The fierce expression on Mason Blake's face, forbidding her from marrying Ethan Turner that day, was still vividly etched in her mind. Nina Taylor dared not imagine how he would react if he ultimately discovered that she still had to marry Ethan Turner. "Nina, to be honest, I've disagreed with your plan from the start," Emma Harper said thoughtfully. "I understand how you feel. If your parents' car accident back then really had something to do with them, as their child, you can't ignore it. But does it have to come at the cost of your own happiness? Do you know what marriage means to a woman?" Nina Taylor remained silent. She didn't want to marry that hypocritical scoundrel Ethan Turner either, but only by marrying into the Turner family could she take the next step in investigating what happened all those years ago. While lost in thought, a familiar voice suddenly interrupted her. "Emma Harper, why are you here?" Speak of the devil, Ethan Turner himself appeared. Emma Harper clearly hadn't expected to run into Ethan Turner here and was slightly surprised, giving a casual nod. Knowing full well that this academic genius always treated others indifferently, Ethan Turner didn't mind. After all, his real target was the beauty sitting next to Emma Harper. Ethan Turner, the young master of the Turner family, was naturally surrounded by beautiful women, thanks to his handsome appearance. But this particular beauty, even from a side profile, was enough to captivate him. Ethan Turner took a step forward, feigning elegance as he asked courteously, "May I ask, who might this young lady be?" Nina Taylor froze, her body stiffening. After years of pretending to be plain, she had never revealed her true appearance to the Turner family. She couldn't help but wonder if something had been discovered. Suppressing the unease in her heart, Nina Taylor lifted her head emotionlessly and glanced at Ethan Turner. A fleeting look of amazement crossed Ethan Turner's eyes, and a possessive expression surfaced on his face. Emma Harper, seated nearby, frowned and was about to speak when Nina Taylor coldly said, "When a gentleman asks someone a question, shouldn't he first introduce himself?" Ethan Turner was secretly delighted and quickly replied, "That was my oversight. My name is Ethan Turner, the eldest son of the Turner Corporation." Despite his attempt to maintain composure, the arrogance in his gaze was unmistakable. Nina Taylor sneered inwardly and nodded. "So, you're the young master of the Turner family." A hint of pride flashed across Ethan Turner's face. With his family background, he didn't believe any woman could remain indifferent. However, Nina Taylor's next words froze the smile on his face. "Is there anything else?" A woman who remained unmoved after hearing his identity, such a thing was unheard of. But looking at the stunning face before him, Ethan Turner didn't dare to vent his frustration. "Not much, really. I just wanted to get to know you." Hearing this, Nina Taylor chuckled. Young Master Turner, you're quite amusing. If you're looking to make friends with a young lady, perhaps this cafe isn't the right place. Just 200 meters to the right after stepping outside, you'll find Falling Flower Paradise. Take your time, no need for goodbyes. You. Ethan Turner was so furious that he couldn't find the words. Yet, in a public setting, he couldn't afford to lose his composure. He forced himself to maintain a refined demeanor and said, Miss, you must have a great sense of humor. I only wish to befriend you. There's no need to be so difficult. If I'm not mistaken, Emma Harper interjected coldly, young Master Turner already has a fiancé. Running around trying to make friends with other women, what would Nina think? Ethan Turner cast a quick, furtive glance at Emma Harper. Ever since they were kids, this bookworm had always stood up for Nina Taylor. Now, she was here to ruin his plans again. Of course not, he said. I just feel a strong connection with this young lady and wanted to make her acquaintance. Nina wouldn't be so petty. Nina Taylor inwardly rolled her eyes. A connection? What nonsense! It was clear he was just a shameless flirt. Judging by Ethan Turner's demeanor, it was obvious he intended to pursue her. With a sly smile, Nina Taylor said, Oh my, so young Master Turner already has a fiancé? My apologies, but I don't make friends with married or engaged men. With that, she grabbed Emma Harper and walked out of the cafe. Ethan Turner stood frozen in place, his face pale. In all his life, this was the first time he had been so blatantly ignored. But as he recalled that breathtaking face, a look of infatuation and deep longing appeared on Ethan Turner's face. Picking up his phone, he dialed a number. Hello, Detective Shao. I need you to investigate someone for me. Meanwhile, after Nina Taylor dragged Emma Harper outside, Emma's face remained clouded with anger. Nina Taylor looked left and right, then smiled and said, Let me tell you, Emma Harper, you keep such a stern face all day long. Are you afraid smiling will give you wrinkles? You're really good at taking care of yourself. Emma Harper shot Nina Taylor a glance. Don't try to change the subject. You know exactly what I'm upset about. Nina, what kind of person is this Ethan Turner? Why do you keep getting tangled up with him? Even if you're trying to uncover the truth or seek revenge, what's your plan afterward? What happens then? Afterward? Make a salad, of course, and maybe throw in some cucumbers. Nina Taylor replied with an innocent grin. You're still joking around? The Turner family is full of ambitious schemers. What if they catch on to your plan midway? Aren't you worried they'll do something reckless? And what about you constantly interacting with Ethan Turner? Aren't you afraid you'll bring trouble upon yourself? Oh, come on, Emma, don't worry. Nina Taylor patted Emma Harper's arm reassuringly. At first, I was a little concerned, but after seeing Ethan Turner's reaction, he clearly hasn't recognized me. So relax, it's fine. The way Ethan Turner looks at you doesn't seem right. How can you be sure he won't secretly investigate you? Emma Harper, ever cautious and thorough, immediately pointed out the potential risk. Nina Taylor pondered for a moment. It should be fine. Most of the time, I go out with makeup on. Even if he investigates, he'll only find information about Shui Yang. I'm usually very careful about my movements. Don't worry. Emma Harper nodded. I hope so. Since Emma Harper still had research work to finish, the two only chatted briefly before parting ways. Feeling bored, Nina Taylor wandered toward Black Mansion, debating whether to ask Mason Blake for help in concealing her whereabouts when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and saw it was Ethan Turner calling. Why did this guy feel like a ghost that wouldn't go away today? Mr. Ethan, she answered, despite her dislike. Nina, you finally picked up. Nina Taylor. You didn't even call before. How could I have picked up? I've been so restless these past 2 days, afraid you wouldn't want to pay attention to me anymore. Nina Taylor rolled her eyes. Sure, restless enough that you just sent Charlotte Smith off and already took another little starlet out for coffee. Mr. Ethan, is there something you need? Nina, you're angry, aren't you? At the last party, I really wanted to announce our engagement, but who would have thought that Chairman Cole would dare to lay a hand on you? Clearly, the whole thing was orchestrated by you people, and now you're playing innocent? The Turners' shamelessness truly knows no bounds. Exactly, Mr. Ethan. I was so scared that night. I kept thinking if anything happened to me at the party, I wouldn't be able to marry you. What would we do then? For some reason, Ethan Turner detected a hint of sarcasm in Nina Taylor's words, and his heart skipped a beat. Nina, what do you mean by that? I don't mean anything by it, I just feel that if I can't marry you, Ethan, in the future, I would be really sad. Ethan, you also really want to marry me, don't you? So that's it, he thought this little girl had discovered something. Ethan Turner gently replied, of course, the person I want to marry most is you, Nina. Though he said that, the image of the woman he had just met floated in his mind. He wondered how far Detective Zhao's investigation had gone, but he was determined to have that woman. Haha, Ethan, you're so good to me, Nina Taylor obediently responded. Nina, I heard that it was young Master Blake who picked you up at the party that day? Ah, here comes the main point. It seemed the Turner family was quite concerned about her matters. I don't know. That day, I was in a daze, and when I woke up, I found myself in a hotel room. Nina Taylor feigned surprise and said, was it second uncle who picked me up? Second uncle is so kind to me. Just throwing her into a hotel, apparently, young Master Blake didn't care about her. It seemed his father's worries were unnecessary. Yes, someday we must properly thank young Master Blake. Speaking of which, Ethan Turner paused for a moment, looking troubled. Nina, I sincerely want to marry you, but as you can see, the Turner Corporation is in chaos right now. How about lending us the draft first? Once everything is resolved, I'll marry you immediately. You want to marry me soon, don't you? Well. Hearing Nina Taylor's hesitation, Ethan Turner continued to persuade her, that's right, Nina. As long as we help the Turner Corporation overcome this hurdle, we can live happily together in the future. Oh, let me think about it carefully. All right, Nina, please think more about our future together. I'll wait for your answer. I understand, Ethan. Oh, bye. The way, Ethan, I'm about to graduate, and the school requires an internship. Can you arrange for me to intern at the Turner Corporation? That way, I can see if I can help out. All right, I'll arrange it right away. Okay, then I'll wait for your call. Sure. After hanging up the phone, Sophia Turner, who was lounging on the sofa, couldn't help but ask, Brother, how did it go? Did that ugly girl agree? She said she needs to think about it. Ugh, what's there to think about? She's lucky you're willing to marry her, and she doesn't even appreciate it. Enough. You never help with anything and only complain. If it weren't for all the trouble you people keep causing, I might have resolved this issue long ago." Hearing this, Sophia Turner immediately stood up. "Brother, how can you say that? Isn't the reason we always bully her so that you can play the good guy? You clearly said she needs to see you as her only savior, so she'd be easier to control. You. All right, stop arguing, both of you." Robert Turner, who had been silently sitting nearby, interjected to mediate. "Ethan, you just mentioned arranging something for Nina Taylor. What is it?" "Oh, it's like this. Nina Taylor said she wants to intern and asked me to arrange for her to join the Turner Corporation. I think we should humor the little girl for now, so I agreed." "At the Turner Corporation?" Robert Turner's eyes narrowed slightly.